Hey, welcome everyone. Yeah, it is Steve Sunday School. I haven't had one of these in a while. Haven't really had much to talk about, I guess, but I'm going to be trying to do these more often, along with some other things. I've been trying to fill up this month full of content. We've got a couple guests lined up already, a couple shows that we're planning to do, a couple special guests for Caffeine Corners and Rum and Coke, and hopefully we're going to have some interesting stuff this month. But this Sunday today. I got Cheshire here, and we're going to kind of go over my blog that I wrote the other night. And I don't know how to explain this very well. This blog was basically in part because of the things that we had seen going on Twitter. Some of the things that I've seen from what I call objective math deniers. And I guess some of them are objectivists in the Ayn Rand sense of the term objectivist. And yeah, I'll be the first to admit, I don't understand objectivism. I have looked into it. I've read Ayn Rand. I've looked at her philosophy. I don't consider it philosophy. I consider it pop science, or excuse me, pop psychology at best. But Cheshire has been diving into it. How's that going for you? Are you shaking or anything? Because when I read Atlas Shrugged, I just wanted to get the damn thing over with. And again, I don't even remember finishing it. I hated that book so bad.
I think I got through part one. So I got up to the bit where they're explaining the relationship, the history between the girl and the like the oil tycoon. Or
Taggart, Daphne Taggart.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
John
yeah.
Galt.
No, not John.
Oh.
The foreign guy.
Oh yeah.
And everyone in the book is an asshole. I'm not sure who I'm supposed to relate to because everybody in the book is like a rich business person to the point that, oh, my business is gonna go under. Oh well, I guess I'll just retire, and that's like their biggest problem.
Well, I mean, that's part of her whole shtick is selfishness, right? I mean, it was anti-altruistic.
But what I'm saying is the characters aren't relatable.
Yeah, yeah.
You have relatable selfish characters. Just all of the conflict and the problems of these characters aren't relatable, unless I guess you're a rich person.
By the way, your volume's low. I could boost you up, or you can do it on your end.
Oh, I can do it. Is that better?
Ooh, that's way too loud because I have you on 10 gain.
There. Is that good?
It's still loud.
It's still loud?
Yeah, but I think it's on mine. Let me see if I can.
I turned it back down. How's that?
That's good there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's even. All right, is that better? Yeah, it's a whole. Yeah, it's all these greedy things and.
It is a bizarre. It's kind of a counterintuitive idea that being selfish is altruistic, except that's not really what they're trying to say. They're saying that being selfish is the only moral way to move forward, which is not conducive to a sustainable society. So, I mean, quite frankly, I think it falls flat on its face, just on its premise. But if you're going to argue the premise, I'm not sure. I think the best point I probably heard was people saying that when it comes to capitalism, being selfish pushes the economy forward. But the problem is that it still needs to be restrained, right? So if you're going to push capitalism forward and you're going to start saying that, okay, well, let's use trickle down economics. Capitalism only works if you're feeding back into the system. But if you're hoarding, like what we're currently seeing, or what we've seen that's got us to the point that we're currently at, particularly in America, that's not capitalism. That's not capitalism functioning the way capitalism's supposed to. It's actually probably closer to what objectivism would.
You talk about like the 1%ers having the largest amount of the currency wrapped up. Yeah.
Right. I'm saying that if you don't put money back into the system, who's going to buy your product?
Yeah, no, I think you're right on that. I don't understand her.
Mathematically doesn't make any sense, which I guess makes sense why they would deny math.
I don't get her economics, but I mean, I'm not even going to pretend I'm going to try.
I don't think she talked about economics very much. She talked about politics, but not economic or how those politics affected economics. Not from what I.
Yeah, but it's still political economics. I mean, it's still intertwined with each other.
Yes,
And I would not be the person to talk to an objectivist about the economic aspect of objectivism. The philosophical aspects that I've read, though, on objectivism it's just. I'm
Well,
sorry, it's not deep thinking. It just is
I've
not.
been trying to start with just reading Rand and what Rand has said, not reading what a philosopher following objectivism has said about it. I'm trying to
Which is
follow
fair.
Rand
Which is fair.
specifically to start with. I'm probably going to get there eventually, but for now I'm just trying to see because I got frustrated and I got annoyed by people harping on mathematics. And so I was like, well, what did Rand say about mathematics? And I haven't found anything yet. Now, to be fair, I have not specifically searched the term Ayn Rand and mathematics. I have not looked for that specifically. I've just been reading her material because I want to look into it anyway, and seeing if she said anything about that, and she hasn't so far. So I'm having trouble bridging the gap of people who follow Ayn Rand having a problem with mathematics. I'm having trouble finding where those
Well,
two
I
connect.
think it ties in because Ayn Rand's overall, from what I understand, and again, take this for a grain of salt because again, when I read something, like when I read a philosophy book or when I read a text or I read mathematics, I try to apprehend what I'm reading, right? I try to drink it in, and sometimes it doesn't happen right away. I could read things multiple times. I can sleep overnight on things. I'll read something. I'll read a paragraph sometimes and then lay down and just ponder that paragraph to try to understand what it's trying to conceptualize because some of these concepts are very difficult. From what I gather, and again, anybody who out there knows about objectivism can say I'm right or wrong on this. I don't know, but from what I gather, Rand's opinion was that if there's something not tangible that exists in reality, then anything that you have that you think may exist or you think has some kind of ontology, if it doesn't correspond to something, then you have an error in your thinking. It's kind of like when I put on my blog, like correspondence theory on steroids or something. So things like actual infinities don't exist. Now,
Well, I
that's what I
imagine
think they're
that
talking
going
about.
into math is already getting too complex if that's the stage that you're talking about. Like if this is the stage and this is where we're having this conversation, I think as soon as you jump into something like mathematics, which is generally considered an abstract description, like or a description of an abstract concept, but the concept exists. Period.
Mhm.
Um, you've already jumped the gun with the conversation that you're having. You're already too far ahead of the person that's trying to have the or you're trying to talk to. So in my brain, you start running into something along the lines of, well, what is a dream or an idea at that point?
Mhm.
Because like an idea may or may not have a tangible objective object, let's say, to go with it. So like you could say that, well, dreams come from the brain and therefore the brain is a physical objective thing that exists, and so therefore dreams are real. But I could also see somebody who argues Rand, because I did see some of this kind of like this. They didn't talk about dreams specifically, but the concepts that they were talking about and the directions they were going in would lead me to believe that they would probably say something along the lines of, well, how do you know? Well, dreams can't be reality because the dreams themselves don't have an object place or an object permanence. And so I don't it's confusing to me because it seems like by the ideals they should be able to follow this line of thinking, but they don't. They follow this train, and so I'm not sure what I'm getting confused as to what I would expect to hear and what I'm actually hearing. If that makes sense, and that's one of the
Yeah, it's
reasons why I
scary.
said
It does. You're getting good at this.
what.
Yeah, it actually does. It is scary because you're actually getting good at this.
Thanks. Oh,
For
I wanted
62
to share
IQ, Goblin, I'm impressed.
for Christmas. My mom sent me these, and
Nice.
they are the fuzziest of thick fuzzy socks. They're basically
That
sock slippers, and I'm so
I'm
happy.
I'm wearing my seasonal winter sweater that I wear during
Yeah, I like
wintertime.
that sweater.
Yeah.
That's a good sweater.
Yeah, like I said, I'm pretty sure this was my dad's. That's why I keep it around. But yeah, no, I think you're right. See, when we talk about what is real, right? I have a problem people using conceptualized things to say that they're real. Like dreams are real. They have some kind of understanding of existence, whether they're something tangible or not. They have some kind of existence. And numbers are the same way. You can think of numbers as what's called mathematical Platonism, where numbers have some kind of real aspect to them. It doesn't mean like I have a physical one. It just means that you treat them and you treat sets and you treat things as actual objects, which is fine. I tend to nominalism, but it doesn't really matter. These are philosophies. There's no right or wrong answer for these things. It's how you want to treat something. And it gets into that whole color of realism, right? Because they just, for some reason, don't want to accept that colors are phenomenological and only exist in the mind.
I get confused because it by a couple of different things, particularly from the Randians that I've seen. This isn't coming from Rand. Like Rand, I think I've got a decent grasp on so far. So she hasn't lost me yet. She might lose me, but she hasn't lost me yet. I think I'm at least following her train of thought. But the threads that I've seen on Twitter confuse me for a few different things. And one of them is that, oh no, don't use jargon, but we're using our own.
I see that too. I see people using jargon, and first of all, they use it improperly. I think they use it in their own kind of skewed way.
Well, they have their own, right? They have
right.
So I would.
It's a private language.
To see, right? Yeah, I have a hard time finding somebody within that community while I was still engaged in that conversation, because I had to stop. I had to be like, okay, oh, no, this is getting nowhere. I need to step back. I need to do some studying because these people are not helping. They're not able to explain. They get angry if you ask them to explain, and then they get belligerent. So I was like, okay, I'm going to step back from asking these people because this is not conducive to. I want to understand. And this conversation is not going to help me do that. So I step back from that conversation to go and do some studying on my own. And so I noticed that I don't think these people who are having the discussion have a tangible, agreed upon, succinct definition of what reality is. So when they use the term reality, they're using it in their own jargon. However, it's not consistent within their own jargon. It's more of like a nebulous, foggy idea that doesn't have, like, they haven't defined it. So it's really hard to have a conversation with somebody talking about what reality is when they're not going to be able to define their term consistently.
Yeah, no, I think there are a lot of terms they use like that. Logic, identity, infinity. They love pointing out things like law of non-contradiction.
Yeah, it seems that they were using a lot of these terms completely interchangeably.
And there's no coherency in their argumentation. And when you call them out for it, when you explain to them, look, this is not how it is understood in these discourses, they make you out to be the person who doesn't get it. But it's like, wait a minute.
Well, I didn't. That was the thing. I didn't get it.
Well, yeah, but no. Let me. But okay, there's the way these things are typically thought, right? There's a typical usage of these terms and normative in philosophy, right? And many words are used multiple different ways. That's fine. But they have their own private language, and they're using these arguments dealing with logic and non-contradiction and infinities in a very bizarre aspect. Now, it is one thing to try to relate to them using their jargon, but they refuse to try to relate to any of us using the philosophical understandings, which means there's a fundamental disconnect there.
There was a bit of a contradiction going on, because you would say that they would say that, hey, no, we're talking about philosophy and only philosophy, and then you'd start using philosophical terms, and then they would get mad,
right?
Be like, well, you're an elitist, and it's like, okay,
yeah.
But so I ran into a problem with just trying to ask them what they meant when they said reality. Like, even describing their own jargon, I had a hard time following it, and I did not get the impression that they wanted anybody to understand. They only wanted people to agree.
Yeah, no, I think that as well. Because when you ask them, what do you mean by this? And then they give you some kind of weird kind of song and dance. It's a lot of prevarication, but
it was like kind of, it was dodgy. Like, the answers you get were dodgy and condescending. So it wasn't like you were just like they were just dodging your question. They tended to talk down towards you and call you stupid in roundabout ways.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But
I don't. I'm stupid. Like, yeah, I don't understand what you're talking about. Like, oh, well, how can you not understand? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I know. I understand that I don't understand, and you understand that I don't understand. Now, can you explain it in a way that I'm going to understand?
And that's the point. I like trying to explain things. I know my audience likes things explained, and they like to explain things. I haven't met an objectivist yet that knows how to explain anything. They just throw things out there as if they're like arguments. I've never had one yet in my life, not just what I've seen on Twitter, but in my life, because I've read Ayn Rand years ago, and I've dealt with objectives before in some kind of, tangential ways. Never has any one of them explained anything in any type of way that you would utilize it practically, or to utilize in a type of college level. Nobody has. No, not one objectivist.
It's pretty easy to tell when somebody's trying to get around a topic. If you ask a yes or no question and they start their answer with but, or they start their answer with something other than yes or no.
Yeah, I do that a lot too,
yes
though.
or
When I tell people answer yes or no, and then kind of these are yes or no closed questions, but then explain. You can
It doesn't
add something to it, but
yes or no question. It definitely doesn't mean you can't explain your
Right.
answer. It just means that I want to understand where you're coming from, because if you explain it, I don't know whether you're saying yes or no.
Yeah, it's not a gotcha either. I don't do yes or no questions. I don't do closed
No,
questions for gotchas. Now, I understand Socratic method tends to do open questions, and there's reasons for this. But however, when you reach a point with somebody, and you've seen me do it with younger creationists and flat earthers, when you reach a point where you're having an impasse, that you're not be able to understand each other, and you're like, okay, let me just figure this out, yes or no.
On the same page.
But they think you're
to get on the same page.
right. But they think you're playing a game of gotcha, and it drives me nuts. It's like, no, it's not a game of gotcha. This is trying to help understand what is going on. Like, I remember, we were talking about philosophy of mind. It's hard to talk about philosophy of mind and not use certain terminological references. And I brought up like property dualism, which I tend to kind of agree with property dualism. I have no problem with that, which is, by the way, a form of monism. But it's like, okay, I'm fine with everything being physical. Everything that exists is physical. However, there's two properties of that. There's the physical properties and there's the mental properties. So if you have something like emergentism, or what's called non-reductive physicalism, where you have the mind that comes from the brain, right? The brain itself is physical, and the mind comes from that, an emergence, or it's just non-reductive. That's fine. I mean, those are pretty much very common ways of looking at the mind. But the mind itself is merely phenomenological. And everybody and this wasn't just the objectivists. This was actually the atheists that were not understanding, when I put this on the Great Debate community on Facebook and in other places, that I was not arguing that the mind can be separated from the brain. That would be actual dualism, right? And that's not what I was arguing.
You also asked a question, and then when people said yes or no, you said, "But I'm not arguing that." And they were like, "I'm just answering the question. I'm not arguing with you. I don't know what you're." That was funny.
Yeah, I was just like trying to get their what they thought of it, but they're like, well, can you show me a mind without a body? I'm like, that's not my argument. I'm not arguing dualism. I'm just saying that property dualism doesn't necessitate that you have a mind independent of the body. It just means that you have mental states that come from the physical states, like source physicalism. You have the physical state first, that's the source, and you have the mind that comes out of it, which, okay, I'm okay with that.
I think that perhaps that was a lesson in sometimes a Twitter poll is not the easiest way to garner the understanding.
No,
of
I
this
agree.
kind of
I agree. Hey, you know what? First of all, live and learn. But second of all, I don't mind that a little bit. I find that it's interesting to see how people, in their own way, will interpret the question, right? That in itself is a learning thing. It's like, how did they get that out of there? Wait, why are they saying, hey, Steve believes that the mind can exist independent of the body? I'm like, where the hell did I argue that? Nowhere. But like I was pointing out, though, these people, they're objectivist. When you start asking about the terminological references they're using, they have no idea what half these things mean in the domain of discourse philosophy or mathematics. Neither. And so, to me, it's like, okay, you're just making shit up at that point, and that's fine if you want to do that with your private language. But you cannot have a rational discourse with somebody who's educated in the field, not talking about myself, but somebody who's, actually studied these things. Because when you do, they're going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? And me, who's a layperson, I'm even worse at it. I'm like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
It wasn't so the thing that I found irritating wasn't that they didn't understand, or that they
didn't want to.
It was that they didn't want to, and they got mad and demanded that the people who were better educated were the problem, or that they were doing something wrong. And it was like, you're missing, and it didn't irritate me because that's like kind of douchey. It actually irritated me because you've missed out on a huge opportunity. because these are people who know what they're talking about and they're taking time out. People who have studied, who are busy people who have taken time out to enter into your conversation, and you can ask them any question you want. So if you don't understand the jargon, you can ask them to explain the jargon. If you don't understand a term, you can ask them to explain the term. So you have a better understanding of what it is that they're trying to say. But instead of understanding people who have spent the time learning in depth these topics, you're berating them for the fact that they do have a better understanding of these topics that you're trying to discuss and have a conversation about and ask, because you're asking questions amongst yourselves. But as soon as somebody from the outside says, "Oh, this question actually has an answer," you get angry about it.
Yeah.
The whole thread reads as, "I'm 14 and this is deep. I'm a 14-year-old, and so I know what's going on, and I think I know these things," or
Well,
I think
that's
"Oh,
subjectivism,
wow,
though.
there's the universe is so grand, and what even is reality? Oh my god!" And it's like, okay, well, actually, I have an answer for you, because that star over these big balls of gas burning billions of miles away. Pumbaa, with you, everything is gas. Like,
every philosopher I've ever talked to is not a fan of objectivism. Now, if there is a philosopher out there that knows it well and they like to come on and ask questions or answer questions, I'd be happy to have them on.
yes,
I would love
please.
that. Matter of fact, I know that there's a podcast that has 4 of them on there. Maybe I'll reach out to a couple of them. I know. Mark Pellegrino said he would come on and talk to Ozzy, but there's like 3 others.
That'd be a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, that'd be an
I
awesome
think.
conversation. There's 3 others in that podcast too. Maybe I'll reach out to them, because I don't want to be unfair to their positions, but I'd like to have somebody answer simple questions, and I have not found an objectivist yet that will answer simple questions. Not one. And then they start talking about logic. Again, none of them seem to know what the hell they're talking about. I mean, they didn't even understand like identity, what identity is, or discernibility, or they throw out like non-contradiction. I'm like, okay, but what's your argument? You're just using these terms, but nothing's being violated here.
So it seems to me that they're using identity and these terms to mean something else than what you are meaning them to be. But like I said, they don't have their own definitions nailed down very well. And that could be because of, like, to tie it back to Rand's philosophy and writings seem to be idealistic and incomplete. Um, at least from what I've read so far. Again, be patient with me. I'm still reading. But it seems to me that they don't have nailed down definitions for these terms, because they, like, the philosophy that they're working with hasn't gotten that far yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for some reason, however, they don't want to use the normative terms. I don't know what that reasoning is, outside of they seem to have this idea about elitism, and being educated means you're elite for some reason. I don't know why, because the thing that confuses me about that also is because their ideals on politics and capitalism and selfishness should mean that people who are educated would be elite and selfish and have a lot of knowledge, because knowledge is valuable. Like, even in Atlas Shrugged, they're talking about how knowledge is valuable. So I find it bizarre that they don't put value on people who have knowledge, or put value on knowledge itself in this regard. I don't understand where the disconnect has happened between Rand's writings and the objectivists that we've dealt with.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you, but I think you're spot on about the fact that they don't like educated people coming around telling them that they're incorrect in their understanding, or they're not relating a concept correctly. They despise that, and yet it happens frequently when people that know what they're talking about listen to what they're trying to say, and they go, "Well, this is just misinformation. You're just wrong." I mean, it's just not even. This is, again, objectively wrong. I mean, mathematics has his objective. Would you tell me that 1 + 1 = 3? For real mathematics, you're objectively wrong. There's no matter of the fact that makes you right. There is nothing that could ever make you right. It's a metaphysical necessity that in all possible worlds, you're wrong. And they don't seem to understand that. Matter of fact, one of the things that Ayn Rand had said, there was a quote that I saw.
Yeah, I think that's because you've gone too far.
Yeah,
I was saying you've gone too far into the convert. Like, this person is back here, and you're over. Like, you've moved the.
But they call that elitism, right? If we're
haven't come with you.
But
They're
if,
still over here, and so when you've traveled from here to here, they're still over here, and they can't now. Now it's too far from point A to point D. Even if you've gone A, B, C, D, they're still at A, and they didn't manage to follow you from A to B. So it's a very much baby step.
well, they call that
To,
elitism, though. I mean, again, okay, I'm just going to say it. Many people that are in the conversations have a lot deeper understanding of these topics than they do. A lot, exceptionally so. So if we're having a conversation up here, and like you said, they're down here thinking that they're up here, there's going to be a problem. And again, it's not trying to be disparaging, but that's exactly what I see happening. Because well, hang on, let me finish. Because every person that I see that they're going after is the only ones that make sense. That I go, they're right. This is correct. This is, this is objectively something that we go verified.
So this is what's kind of bizarre to me. If you're like, I don't understand the jargon, and these people who are educated are locking me out of the conversation, or they're them using these terminologies mean that I can't join in or understand what's going on. How can you be have less education than them and be more adept at the same time? It's both for some reason. And so depending on where you look in the conversation, you will see that they think they're here, but they also think they're here. So no matter what direction this person goes in, whatever they're doing is going to be wrong no matter what.
Well,
Just the fact that they're and the fact that they have education is
Well, let me give you an
cool.
example of how in transit they are and how inflexible they can be. Because again, one of the Rand's things is that she had said something along the lines of, if you have a set of premises that leads to a contradiction, then there are no contradictions that exist in reality. Remember, existing in reality. Therefore, one of your premises is wrong, which is okay. That trivially true. Okay. But nobody claims there's any contradictions that it can exist in reality. That would only exist in what's called an impossible world, which is, by the way, they just by fiat just ignore. But when you're talking about like modalities, what's called laic modalities, you talk about what's possible and what's necessary. These are very specific terms in modal logic, and they just poo-poo all over it. Because they're just saying, okay, well, there's no such thing as contradiction, so we're going to get rid of all paraconsistent logic, all diatheistic logic, in probably intuitionist logic, even though that doesn't allow for contradictions. But they're just by fiat getting all these different forms of philosophy. They're just throwing them out the window only because something so simple as, oh wait, if all your premises lead to a contradiction, one of your premises are wrong, or you have what's called a reductio, right? A reductio ad absurdum is where your premises are true that lead to a false conclusion, which means that something's wrong, right? I mean that shows that that's a proof. That means that something is definitely not the case, right? It doesn't exist, or it's not the case. But her view is like, well, there's no contradictions in reality. Okay, sure. I mean, obviously, A not equals not A is it cannot be, right? Something cannot be not itself. We understand that. Yeah. But when we talk about like the simulation theory, we had brought that up, where you have three statements, and I don't remember the exact three statements, but one of them has to be false. We know this. When I had brought up my when I remember I talked about Campbell's where the mind is a philosophy of mind on the mind body problem, where the mind is physical. The brain is physical, the mind is mental. Both of them seem to interact with each other, but non-physical things can't interact with physical things. One of those statements has to be false, and we know this. That's the whole point of the argument, the mind-body problem.
Yeah, we know, but which one is it?
Which one? Right? And they tend to argue. They don't solve anything. Even like Hume's problem of induction. I asked very poignantly, okay, well, how do you resolve this? Because you said there's no dilemma, there's no problem. It was nonsense. It was abject nonsense.
It's a weird kind of crossover that I see happening, where it's like, this is the exact reason why people hate philosophy, because it just circles around and goes nowhere. But at the same time, it's the people who dislike philosophy that like it so much, because it very much, it's not what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of philosophy can get very counterintuitive once you start getting into more advanced things, and once you start getting into more complicated, and it can feel very convoluted when you start getting into different problems, and you start getting into different logics and why you would use one logic here and one logic there. We're getting into the nitty gritty. But because it's not easily understood, it's viewed as either elitism or people are circle jerking because they're not getting anywhere. But
Correct.
what you don't realize is that the philosophers are getting somewhere to them,
Yes.
right? They're getting somewhere.
So are the
But
mathematicians.
you can't see the progression because you don't see in that color, let's say.
They epistemically
Whereas
limit themselves. Yep.
people that we're dealing with have that same view, except that they're doing that thing because they're actually not getting anywhere. Because when somebody comes along that can answer the question because they've studied it,
They're ostracized.
they're like, no, who do you think you are that you could answer such a deep and philosophical and complex question when it's like actually the answer is just four. To be the bearer of bad news.
So let me read a couple things out of the live chat, then we'll get into the blog.
Yeah, go ahead.
Zess, she asked a question that I don't, and she's not, but he asked about Eve, and I don't know if you know who Eve is from. She has a PhD in philosophy. She's one of S.J. Thomason's friends. I think that's who he's referring to. I think she might be an objectivist, but her philosophy is bizarre. Now I've asked S.J. because S.J. I have no reason to doubt her on this. She says she knows her in real life that she is a real PhD in philosophy, but it's bizarre because every time she posts something about philosophy, even the actual philosophers go, wait a minute, no, that's not the case. And she makes these really bad arguments, right? Now, she has unblocked me because S.J. Thomason said, I was cool. But he had blocked me for a while. But she does remind me of an objectivist. I don't know if she is, but it might be a very good point that if she's not in that group, but she might be.
I wonder if it would be valuable for her to come on and talk to us sometime.
She won't. She won't. She's never been online. This is what I'm saying. Where I talked to SJ, and I'm like, I don't know who she claims to be because she's never been a hangout. She's never. We don't. Nobody knows her real information. She just says she has a PhD, but nothing she said. Nothing she says to me shows she has an understanding of these things. Even though S.J. Thomason swears she has a PhD, but did you see it? But this is the arguendo that she does. Okay, great, but she doesn't do any of that kind of online stuff. But
I saw Owl say something. Let me pull it back up again.
Read Howlando.
Yeah,
read that one.
For a lot of people, objectivism is their introduction to philosophy. It was for me 20 years ago, so I cut them some slack. There's a Dunning-Kruger component to objectivism. And so we did a video on Dunning-Kruger, and I shit you not, it was like, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks between when we did that episode and we started running into this, and it was just like, how can you think you know so much about something you've never gone to school for, so much to the degree that you are telling professionals that they're wrong? And it's like, how can you be so? It comes off as very, very arrogant. But it was just like that Matt guy, that PhD Matt guy who was like, I have a PhD in mathematics. There's no philosophy in mathematics. And it was
but you know, some people crapped all over him.
What?
So many people were crapping on him.
It's such a bizarre say. I think Landon was able to give that guy a very, very very much charity because we ended up asking him about that on one of the streams on my channel that he was on.
Landon tends to give people more charity than I do nowadays.
Well, he definitely still kind of shit on him. He just shit on him.
Well, yeah, I listened. Yeah, he shit on him in a nice Landon kind of way. Howlando also said. Howlando also says your incredulity is because objectivists haven't read much other philosophy. Speaking as a recovered objectivist, Dunning-Kruger. Yeah, and either that or they don't understand what they're reading, and I think that might be the case because, again, if you wanted to hold to a philosophy like objectivism, okay, fine. But if you can't understand the other terms that are being talked about and the philosophy other than that, then what's the point of having a conversation about philosophy? I'm at least trying to understand objectivism. I just think it's very difficult to understand because there's just nothing. It just seems like pop psychology to me. I don't see anything deep about it, and it certainly doesn't resolve anything. It's not a philosophical mindset.
Some of it sounds good. Like some of it sounds really intuitive on its face.
So is Jordan Peterson.
Right. As soon as you think about it for longer than 30 seconds, it's like, wait a second, let's follow the logic here and see what happens when we do so. And it's like, oh, well, that doesn't work.
Yeah,
So
Eve Kinnean, that's yeah, is that she? Yeah, Eve Kinnean. She might be an objectivist. She doesn't seem to be like one because her arguments are very similar, as far as just foundationally not being, to me, well thought out.
Mhm.
But yeah, Sean Carroll says philosophy forces me to reevaluate my thoughts. That's another possible reason they don't want to reevaluate their thoughts or evaluate their thoughts. Yeah, you're right. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Philosophy makes you think, right? And if they're not willing to even think, like for example, like object math deniers, the people that deny the fundamentals of math, and this is ubiquitous with a lot of these objectivists, they're not capable of reevaluating their thought processes. They're epistemically closed. They're not epistemically virtuous by any stretch of the imagination. Because if you're going to deny math, you're not going to tell me about what's objective and not. I'm sorry. If you tell me 1 + 1 = 3, what am I going to think about that person, right?
It comes to me. It sounds like when I'm reading about this versus when I'm reading about objectivism versus watching on Twitter, and I did find a debate that I haven't. I saved it. I haven't watched it all yet, and it's Christopher Hitchens, and it's a 2-on-2 debate about objectivism and laissez-faire capitalism, and these are professors. So it's a little bit to me that's a little bit more valuable than necessarily just shit flinging on Twitter. Um, so I'm interested to see because in the way I'm viewing what's being said on Twitter versus what I'm reading about objectivism, they don't match. Like they seem to be objectively against things that objectivism does not appear to be opposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't understand why these people would go against something that that objectivism doesn't go against.
Because of their own misunderstandings, I guess.
Maybe it just seems it seems bizarre to me, and I mean that could be a mix of a misunderstanding or misreading, using terms differently. Because I would probably I'm going to make a guess here, and I'll go out on a limb and say it's likely that a paper written by an objectivist professor is using terminology in a way that is standard within philosophy, and they're reading it with their nebulous understanding of that word. And I call it nebulous not to be derogatory. I call it nebulous.
No, just because they don't really define them. Yeah,
they haven't nailed down like a consistent definition.
Yeah, well,
so,
like what is real? I mean, they love throwing out that word "real," and yet reality being well, yeah, but it's like. Again, a lot of people are trying to explain to them that reality is an assumption. There is an axiomatic assumption to be had there. And they're like, oh, well, so you're saying you don't know if something's real. It's like, you're not understanding what the person's trying to explain to you about reality being assumed, because there's no way you can have that kind of epistemic knowledge that reality is anything that is outside of the mind as an internal mind. Because, first of all, any evidence that is external is evidence for its internal and vice versa. There's no preponderance of the evidence to be had. Anything that shows for one can be shown for the other. And so we make certain assumptions that reality is external, that reality exists in some capacity. But
let me give you an example of something that would spiral out of control and turn into a mess of a conversation that has no reason to be. I just looked up at that number up there. It's an objective fact that Steve does not have access to that show. Is that real?
Yes.
Yeah, but how would that conversation play out on Twitter?
No, I don't. Again, they are what they consider real and what not real seems to be all over the place. Is
the show an abstract concept, or is the show objectively real? Like what? And I think it's arbitrary which one they would decide, because it would depend on how you phrased the question and when you asked.
Again, it goes into like various theories of truth, which, by the way, none of them have ever discussed, right? In correspondence of theory of truth, there's a certain truth maker that exists that will be the reason why a proposition is true or not. And if there's an instantiation of something, like, for example, dogs exist. What makes a dog exist? Well, I have an instantiation of a dog right here. That's the truth maker that makes the proposition, dogs exist, true. Now, not all
Right.
theories have that. Not all of them have truth makers. Some have truth conditions. Some are semantic. But again, these are very nuanced types of discussions. I haven't seen one of them discuss
Or
anything
what
like
if you
that.
start getting into physics, right? As soon as you get into physics, into theoretical
Oh God, that
from
would throw.
standard
Yeah,
physics into theoretical physics into quantum physics.
yeah.
Like if you try and follow that line, like try asking about the double slit experiment and see what happens.
I again, I would be kind of scared to because they touch on words like quantum mechanics, but I don't know if they've ever. Again, I'm not trying to be disparaging, and it's going to sound like it, and I don't mean to be. I've asked them to explain concepts. I try to explain what we're talking about. I always have on this channel, right? If somebody says, "Hey, Steve, can you stop and explain what you just talked about?" I always try to stop and explain it. Do I not?
Yeah.
Right? Because I try to use things that I understand. If I ever do have something where I don't understand, I'll be like, well, I don't think I can relate it in a proper way. Let me kind of get back to you on it, kind of thing.
Well,
They
there's also like this also doesn't necessarily mean every single one of them is like this,
no, I'm not. I'm
right?
not trying to be universal in these.
But yeah, there's a handful within this, but you'll notice that the ones that aren't like this don't do anything to assist their own cause in just allowing or encouraging the ones that are like this to be this way,
Yeah. Uh,
right? So you see what I'm saying?
yep.
Kawasa for 10 says, I just find them to be a type of LARPers. They aren't really interested in philosophy. They're only interested in one philosophy and don't understand anything else. It definitely does seem to be like that they want to feel smart and speak like they are elite. And then as soon as somebody who knows more comes along, they get
Yeah,
that,
you
that
can
you
even
know, they
ask them. Well, what do you think about this? And they don't have an answer to it. They don't know what it is. What do you think about this? They don't know what this
but
is.
instead of
What's
just
your
saying
opinion on
that,
this?
they
What's
get
your
mad at
stance on
you.
this? They have nothing because they've never looked at any other thing. It seems like. You know, I mean, are you an idealist? Are you a realist? Are you an objective? I mean, are you for moral objectivism? Are you a moral, realist? Are you a moral irrealist? Are you a moral non-cognitive? There's a lot of different positions, right? And
Yeah.
look, I feel there's no right position for a lot of things. I think it's whatever you you think it works best for you that has some kind of cohesion and coherence between your web of beliefs,
Yeah.
right? Which is
I
fine.
I try not to decide whether or not someone is right or wrong in
But why they
regards to
believe what they
either
believe.
as long as they're consistent.
Yeah.
As long as they're internally consistent, I don't tend to care very much. So I don't care if somebody believes in a god. What I do care about is if they're like, but all of you other people are heathens and deserve to get stoned to death. Then I'm like, okay, but why? And then they say, oh, because of this horrible thing in their whatever. And I'm like, okay, but yours is saying that they should stone other people, which is equally or worse. So why shouldn't you be stoned by your own logic? So it's like it's I care about consistency.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is that objectivism, at least they're not consistent to what I've read about objectivism so far and what Rand has actually said. So in this case, I'm not even convinced that these people are actually objectivists anymore. I think there are some kind of offshoot that has become something else.
Well, they still have some of
I
the
don't
same tendencies I've seen from other objectivists, and that's to obfuscate. That seems to be a very common thing, and to character assassinate people that don't agree with them, almost like the Scientologists do. They use that term negativist as if it's like a suppressive person, and
I
so
asked more than once what a negativist, and none of them would answer me.
yeah,
They
it's
just ignored me.
yeah, it's well, but again, not all of them think this. I have. I'm not going to get into our private conversations, but I have had private conversations, and not all of them agree with each other. A lot of them will say,
Oh,
"Yeah, we don't know. We don't know what the hell they mean by this either," and that's yeah,
you don't
yeah,
even need to go into private
yeah,
conversations to tell that not all of them agree
yeah.
with the others. It's just more of like the only issue that I tend to have with that, it's like you wouldn't allow anybody else to behave this way. So why are
Double
you
standard.
allowing these people to behave this way? So that's the thing that I value there is the consistency. If you're not if you're not being consistent, how can I possibly trust you?
Yeah.
Because inconsistency is inherently um sporadic. It's arbitrary.
Well, it's
And
it's
so
okay. I'm sorry.
and so if your standard is arbitrary based on who, how do I know when I'm going to be the who in any regard? Right? And so if I don't know if when and where I'm going to be that person you decide isn't okay or is okay, then I can't trust that because then I'm walking on eggshells about whatever I'm saying around this person. And so that's not valuable to me. That's a waste of my time.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't like that.
I
I distrust.
well, again, I mean, when it comes to like, internal consistencies and things like that nature, if somebody told me they were a theist and they also told me they were theological and a cognitivist, I would have an issue with that because those are very diametrically different positions.
Did we have
You
a
can't be both.
conversation like that with Alex?
Alex Malpass?
If he was saying no, cosmic skeptic,
Yeah, one time he claimed to be
something
a
like
moral
that.
non-cognitivist and a moral subjectivist, and I'm like, those are not compatible. You can't. Those are subjectivism and moral objectivism and moral subjectivism, which by the way is unrelated to Rand. But if you're more realist or more subjectivist, those two positions are cognitivist positions. So they're incompatible with a non-cognitivist position like emotivism or
Kawasa for 5 said, then isn't that a problem by itself? It means tribal values override criticism in their own
Oh yeah,
rights.
we point that all the time, Kawasa. Yeah, it is tribalism, straight up tribalism. I mean, I don't know of the word that would describe it more accurately than straight up tribalism. Now, people call it cult. I don't think it's an actual cult, but it's cult-like mentality. Yeah, okay, but I mean, there's an attributes of a cult-like mentality. But tribalism, I think, is the better way to put it because one, they don't handle criticism. And they have a huge double standard. But Zeshi makes a good point. He says PVM, which is positive versus negative, which is some guy I end up blocking him. I know the guy like for years, but he is really inept. I said it several times. This person can't show or prove 1 + 1 = 2. Yet said he or she could. Again, the first proof for 1 + 1 = 2 did take over 300 pages. It was done by Bertrand Russell and White. I think his name was Whitehead or Whitemore. Whitehead wasn't, I don't know what, but it was Bertrand Russell worked on it as well. It was through axiomatic assumptions, and this is how math was built up. A lot of them don't understand how math was actually developed in different forms of math. And now there's a friend of mine, Zemo, who is a logician. He is working on, I believe, his PhD in logic. He has studied under Graham Priest, if I'm not mistaken, who's a very well-known logician. The guy knows his shit. He did a very quick and dirty proof about 1 + 1 = 2 using really a similar thing for axiomatic assumption. Was it as rigorous as Russell's? No, because it wasn't 300 pages. It was 1 page. But he used very similar. Yeah, it was over Twitter. But he showed. But I at least understood where he was going with it. And I even asked him. I said, "Are you basing this on von Neumann notation and orders, where you have a set theory where you start with an empty set, then you have one, and you have ordered pairs in the set, and there's also different axiomatic structures for that." And he's like, yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. So you see SS0, S00. You're building it up axiomatically. And so that's how he did his mathematical proof, which it works, right? My proofs on Twitter are not rigorous, but when I prove something, it's just a simple proof, right? And if you want a rigorous proof, you go to an actual mathematician, right?
What Zeshi points out, which is really poignant, is that they said this person demanded when this person said 1 + 1 = 2, they prove it, and they did. But I did not see that same demanding or that need and that push, that desire when somebody said 2 + 2. I could say 2 + 2 = 5. They didn't have that reaction to that person saying
Well,
that.
the person wasn't arguing. Well, hang on.
it.
The person didn't argue 2 + 2 = 5. They argued erroneously that you could prove 2 + 2 = 5, and that obviously you can't do.
I have a screenshot. 2 + 2. I can prove 2 + 2 = 5 mathematically. That's what they said.
Right. No, that's exactly what they said. But I'm going to give them a little principle of charity. They weren't saying that 2 + 2 = 5. And this is where it gets into trouble. By saying they can prove 2 + 2 = 5, they are indirectly saying 2 + 2 = 5. That is true. Okay. Let's go with that. But yes,
is whether or not they can or cannot.
I never saw them try.
The demand to prove it and to explain and to show their work was not as rigorous and was almost, you might say, non-existent. And when other people did say, hey, maybe show what you're talking about,
they never do.
that person reprimanded those people for making those demands that they were then making of somebody else later down the line.
Yeah.
That's the inconsistency that's a problem. I don't care if you want to say, hey, listen, you're saying 2 + 2 = 1 + 1 = 2, you have to prove it. That needs to apply across the board, not just to one or two people.
But you notice my answer? I said, yeah, I can't prove 1 + 1 = 2. I was honest about it. I couldn't do what Zemo did. Right, because he's well skilled in this thing. I couldn't do that kind of mathematical proof.
It's almost like in some cases, you would trust somebody who's actually an expert to be able to do that instead of you having to be an expert in every single thing,
Yeah. I mean, but some of
right?
them are like I have one apple plus one apple equals two apple. I'm like, oh my God, that's not a proof.
I don't expect, let's say, I don't expect Fight the Flat Earth to be a theoretical physicist. I don't expect him, if I go to him with a physics question, I don't expect him to be able to directly show me every single thing every single time because that's not what he does. He's not a professional in that regard. Now, does that mean I couldn't go to him with a physics question and he might be able to get me the answer? Or he might be able to point me in the direction of where I could find the answer to that question. Sure, but there's a point where he's going to need to or desire to trust certain aspects of whatever he's arguing,
Um,
right?
real quick, Halando says you can prove anything equals anything if you're really clever about how you divide by zero. Actually, no. See, but the reason being is you can't prove it because if you're dividing by zero, you're not doing a proof. A proof, by definition, must be valid and true, right? It must be sound, must be true. You cannot have a false proof. Either a proof is true or it's not a proof. Period. So if you do something and you're dividing by zero in order to do some kind of BS, you don't have a proof. So you're not proving anything. A proof must
Stephen
be
Bowman
true.
for 2.99 gave us thumbs up.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank
I've
you.
been enjoying interacting with Stephen on Twitter. It's been great.
Are you doing geological stuff?
Listen, he's still trying to take a tally of every individual rock's epistemological stance on whether or not a god exists.
I learned I watched
You gotta ask every single rock and then take the average.
I watched his video. I learned that sand was a rock. I didn't even think about that so I watched one of his videos. Which I watch people's videos. Sand is a rock. Yes, it is sand is a rock. People are like, yeah, and I was like, yeah, that actually makes sense.
Steve behaves like he's
I love learning new shit.
Steve acts like he's an abused girlfriend, if you guys haven't noticed.
Why is that?
I watch people's videos. Nobody was questioning you.
Oh no, I know, right? I know. People don't think I watch their shit. I watch things I like. That's all.
Mannerisms. Maybe I should go through it sometime with or without Steve, and I'll pull a couple clips together and be like, listen, Steve acts like an abused girlfriend. Let me show you why. Let me show you
it's
how.
Shell shock. It's PTSD.
And now let me explain to you why he behaves in this manner.
It's PTSD is what it is. No, I'm not going to even say that because I don't have PTSD. That I don't want to diminish for the people that actually do have PTSD. So
let's get into your blog.
Yeah, let's get in the blog. So, all right, now hopefully you guys can see this. Weird thing happened today. We started my computer and my drivers went to. I'll blow them up a little bit. My drivers went to crap on one of my monitors, and so it changed my aspect ratio from 16:9 to 4:3. I haven't been able to figure out how to get it back, so it's really kind of odd. I'll figure it out, but hopefully this will be visible to you guys on the outside here.
Sucks to be Steve.
Yeah, I mean, is that legible? Is that big enough? Can they read that?
Well, you're gonna have to take a second for me to.
All right, I'll look on the outside too. Good. All right, that's good. Yet? Yeah, scroll down.
Yeah, that's readable.
All right.
Yeah, that looks good to me.
How do you want to do this? Do you want me to read it? You read it. You read it, and I kind of explain what I mean by it.
Sure. Yeah, I can read it, and you can explain.
All right.
Objectivism in
intentionality.
Why did I bring up intersectionality? It's like we were talking about that. But that's not what this blog is about.
Yeah, it just just think of it as intention with a T, but it's with an S. Yeah, intentionality.
I read it right when I read it the first time, but when I went to read it out loud, my brain just skipped to. Yeah. Recently, myself and a number of others have been engaging online with a group of objectivists of the Ayn Rand kind. And to say their misunderstanding of philosophical concepts are profound would be a bit of an understatement. They seem to consider themselves some type of deep thinkers, but generally only tend to only present a very basal and superficial understanding of the complex topics that they try to discuss online. They also tend to be centered around actor and self identified objectivist Mark Pellegrino, Lucifer from Supernatural, who was an amazing guest on my YouTube channel and who can certainly carry his own weight on many of these topics, even if I fundamentally disagree with some of his views. But I'm hoping this blog can elevate the discussion and elucidate some of the key concepts that we have been discussing back and forth. Bracket, some even argue you can't start a sentence with but. But you know me, I'm such a rebel.
Elucidate, but yeah. So this was actually a thing. First of all, that they were arguing you can't start a sentence with but. I'm like, sure you can, and you can start one with and. These are not hard, fast rules. I mean, again, the English language is very malleable, and almost everything you learned about split infinitives and dangly participles and starting sentences with and but in school is BS. It's basically those were just trivial guidelines, but any decent writer they'll flaunt these rules. It's called flaunting.
I do not recommend everybody necessarily break rules of English language. They're not because they can't be, or they shouldn't be broken. It's because there's a difference between classical writing or essays and writing the way you speak, which is like your Twitter, I'm writing a blog, or like that is a YouTube comment. That is all supposed to be the way you speak, and you do not speak in classical essay format. If you did, people would think you're a fucking robot.
But me starting with sentences but here, you have no objection to that.
No, that's fine. However, if you are a writer and you're writing, let's say, a book, or you're writing an article, or like a weekly kind of submission news something, if you're doing something along those lines, something like a little bit maybe more professional, do not flaunt the rules unless you know the rules well enough to flaunt them.
Yes, I agree
so with that. You see that in a lot of writing, you see it in a lot of speaking, and you see it a lot in probably the worst place is advertisements, and in like Fox News or CNN, them when those people are speaking, that is most of the time obscene and terribly worded and written and spoken. So do not flaunt the rules unless you know how the rules function. Is the same with philosophy and mathematics. Don't flaunt the rules, don't ignore the rules or change the rules or bend the rules unless you understand the rules well enough to bend them without breaking them to the point where it's incomprehensible.
There's been a few bad PR things because people didn't know the rules that they flaunted. In mathematics, there's something very similar. There's called abusive notation, and people utilize it quite a bit. Like I always tell people, you can't take infinity times infinity. You can't say infinity minus one, because infinity is not a number to be used with a binary operator. But we flaunt those all the time to understand concepts. When I say infinity minus one, it's a concept of, if you have an infinite set and I remove one element, so I'm doing a finite thing to it, the set remains infinite. Those are concepts, right? So it's fine to do it that way, but you have to understand infinity itself cannot be used with a binary operator because it's not a number. It's not a real number.
Like if you're writing a novel, you're not expected to follow essay format. That wouldn't make any sense. You're writing a novel. However, if you're writing something like a novel, there are still rules and standards to follow when writing. And if you're writing dialogue for a character, that is when you're really going to flaunt the rules of writing and of spoken word and what words make sense where and when, because this is a character speaking, and that character's way of speaking may not be the most comprehensive way to speak. So
yeah, well, you'll say that a lot when you're dealing with what's called an idiot box. Ever heard of that? Is when idiot box is a type of expository where let's say that we have a show, right? Like a TV show. And I want to be able to explain to the audience what's going on. So the character explains something to somebody else. It's just called an idiot box. You're just talking. So the audience, like, I really miss such and such who had to go away to college. Okay, what happened to that character? Oh, they went away to college, right? That's what they do expository.
Exposition dumps.
But yeah, infinity minus infinity, feline ass is 0. No, the reason being is you don't know if the elements are the same. It's be undefined. Infinity minus infinity. If I have all the real numbers, right, minus the infinite set of natural numbers, I still have an infinite set, right?
I am baffled by the number of people that don't know how to use a dictionary, like like what a dictionary is and how to use it, how it functions.
Because well, first of all, they think that dictionaries are prescriptive. They're not. The most of them are descriptive, but they're also what's called synchronic. They deal with the time period as opposed to diachronic. Diachronic would be like historical uses. But synchronic means the uses of the word nowadays as common vernacular, common general parlance. It doesn't mean that this word is defined by this. In mathematics, this works a little different. In mathematics, we can define something to be something. It's prescriptively defined, right?
One of the best examples I think I know is the difference between the word persuade and the difference between the word convince. Those are two different words, and they mean different things.
Yeah, you can persuade somebody and not convince them. Convince means that you actually hold the belief to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
If I've convinced you, then you have a belief now that the proposition is true.
I can persuade Steve to do something that he still might think is not a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. Or you just might move them a little bit. If I even moved you closer to something, I persuaded you a little bit, but I haven't convinced you. Mm-hmm. Steve Bauman, $5. Want to do that one?
But are rocks atheists, man? Rolly eyes, smack my head. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Just ignore me.
I love the fact that people are recognizing this stuff. It took several years. Steve was right.
It took you needing me around. That's what it took.
I've been harping on these things for years. It's finally people came around and said, a lot of people came around and said, God damn, yeah, these atheist activists, they're really saying some stupid shit.
It's because we were able to make a show that was able to explain to people exactly what the flying fuck was going on. That's what Caffeine Corner is. That's what it's all about. And that's when we started seeing that shift.
Yep, I agree with you.
People didn't go... I didn't see a single person really go after Aaron at all for years.
It was all tribalism.
Until you start pointing things out in a constructive way where people can start to recognize these things on their own. They don't need us to point them out anymore.
And that's giving them the tools. That's what a lot of this channel is about. Not just Caffeine Corner, but the channel as a whole is to give people tools. And again, it's not going to be a super popular channel. I don't expect it ever to be, but the people.
I'm so proud at the elevated and the better approach and the goodest things that I have seen people adopt and adapt that I am so happy and proud of the people.
It's been influential.
They've made there are people that I've seen engaging that either didn't engage before because they didn't know how or didn't want to, or people that have engaged before in such a more a manner that's going to be more conducive to furthering the conversation or in a manner that's productive. And so I will be clear, sometimes being productive does not mean being the nicest to the exact person you're talking about.
Yeah,
you can be or talking to. You can be productive while still shitting on somebody.
No, I agree.
I'm not saying what you should or should not do. I'm just saying it's
been notable and it's been informative, and a lot of people have taken what we've put out there and used it. And I love that. I hope people would share these things more. Going into this new year, first of all, I'm horrible.
I'll just do 1 second.
Yeah, I'm horrible at self-promotion. People know that's one of my weak areas. I suck at it. I really do. But I think that this year, hopefully, we can promote ourselves a little more and have. I have a list of people. I have a huge list of people that I've actually contacted or intend to contact that will help promote us when we're ready. Bigger names, much bigger names in YouTube, but I'm not utilizing them yet. There are going to be people that want to do some stories on some of the things that have happened over the last year or 2 years. I know a lot of people that want to have stories done on things relating to the Non Sequitur show. That'll happen, and these are some very, 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 very big channels. I mean, hundreds of thousands of subs. Some of them a 250,000 more. So when that's ready, we'll utilize that to promote. But until then, we ask that people help share our videos. and that's just not for this channel, but for Cheshire's channel, and the channels that are related to us that we will be supporting. I'm doing a lot of consultation on some newer channels that are coming out, or at least that kind of, most of them have kind of been out, but they haven't really got a direction yet. But I've been working with them, helping them understand OBS. I've been giving tutorials in private on how to use OBS, how to use YouTube, how to do things that they didn't know how to do. And so I want to work as a community with that. That's the whole point of the Great Debate community, even though that's kind of defunct. But the whole concept behind the Great Debate community is that there's a community that shares ideas and shares these types of values. Because I can tell you right now, I detest the values I see on Twitter a lot. So I see some people that I find morally reprehensible. Their values are not mine. Their values are inconsistent. Their values are deplorable. And I want nothing to do with them. And all I want to do for this channel is give people the tools to recognize that and let them decide for themselves if that's the kind of people that they want to be or associate themselves with. That's simple. That's my goal for this year. But I do appreciate if you guys help share. Arnie, my buddy Arnie, for 50 knock. That was tribalism. Too much love for Arn to cope. Sad. Yeah, I know Arnie. You know, and it's bad too because you know, I really like Arn, but damn, he got to be just as much a mindset of a creationist. His atheist activism took over him so much to the degree that he was just not even wanting to understand logic properly. And then people that did understand logic properly would go, hey, Aaron, this is just not correct. You know, you're not understanding these things properly. And instead of saying, hey, can you explain this to me in a way I can understand it so I do understand it properly, they don't do that. They just kind of shit on you and try to character assassinate you. And it again, notable to the people that have watched our shows and watched Caffeine Corner and go, yeah, this is not the type of behavior that we want to see. You know, Noke is what is it? It's Swedish. Swedish. NOK is Swedish, I believe, right? But we got a lot. Like I said, we got a lot of shows this month. I'm going to be doing Over and Under with Atheist Pastor more. We've got guests lined up for Caffeine Corner. I've got some people coming on for Rum and Coke nights. I'm going to try to you know, up the game a little bit here for this next year, slowly but surely. So we will need your help for that. So please share these videos. And also, do me a favor, share my word of the day. Norwegian crone. That's what it is. Norwegian crone. But I'm doing a word of the day every day for this year of a term that's related to math, physics, science, or philosophy. And I'm just kind of arbitrarily doing it at random. I am keeping a track of them, and I have a folder for that. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to explain a word or a concept in one comment, in one tweet or less. Maybe expand upon it a little bit more in more than one tweet if it needs be, or give some examples. But it's maybe just start a conversation. But I want to be able to succinctly, stipulatively, sometimes explain something in my own words and see what people think of it. Haven't got too much feedback on it yet, but if you're on Twitter, please share those and let people, you know. Sek is Swedish. Okay. All right, so I'll move on with my blog here while we're waiting for Chush. As I've said before, more times than I can even remember, Twitter is a cesspool and not really the place to be able to suss out nuances in many of the things this group bring up. And they, for some reason, seem to have notable aversion to, quote, jargon, which we've noted before. Any potential for productive dialogue is irrevocably lost by being bogged down in petty semantics or trivial points of little or no relevance to the fundamental philosophical concepts at hand. It is difficult enough to explain very complex concepts, even more so on Twitter, and even more so when they use a vernacular of private language all their own, and don't understand the philosophical terminology except to throw out philosophical words out there almost seemingly randomly, as if they're some type of defeater to an argument. Also, as I have said before, your misunderstandings are not refutations to my arguments. That's my motto. That's my statement. So if you hear that out there, it's mine. Your misunderstandings are not refutations to my arguments, because that's what I find a lot of people doing when they even try to criticize my logical proofs or my blog. It's like, well, you're not understanding the concept correctly. How are you refuting me? And I say this. I say, look, if you think that I'm wrong, all you have to do is convince one expert, and they'll come to me and say, Steve, yeah, you screwed the pooch on this. And that doesn't mean you have to be an expert in it. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm saying is, if I think you have a misconception, And I could be wrong on that, but if I think you have a misconception, then you're not refuting my argument, right? And if everybody else tells me, hey, yeah, you know, they have a misconception on this, Steve, what am I supposed to do? How much time do I spend on that? If everybody who is an expert saying, yeah, they're not understanding your argument properly, it's not just me, I have a little bit of a validation there that it's not just me saying, yeah, I don't think you're understanding the argument correctly. And I see younger creationists do it all the time with evolution. They don't understand evolution, right? We all agree they don't understand evolution very well. So when they argue something is wrong about evolution, almost without exception, it's a misconception.
Lines on paper.
Yeah, it's almost without exception, they have a conceptual error. So how much time do you invest with their counter arguments if their counter arguments don't hold any water because it's based upon a misunderstanding?
There's something that we've done in the past here. By the way, we need to put that on a shirt. One of the things that we've gone over a couple of times is that we tend to stop somebody in the middle of whatever they're saying if there is a conceptual error. If there's an error in like, no, that wasn't the question I asked, or no, sorry, you're misunderstanding this word or this term. That's not what that is, because you're not going to let somebody ramble on for 20 minutes down their argument when you're just going to say, okay, you didn't understand
especially in
my
science
question.
Yeah,
There's no waste of everybody's time, but on Twitter you don't have that option. That's not that it's not a back and forth like that. Plus there's such a them versus us sort of mentality that they think that if you don't agree with them or you're saying no, you've misunderstood something, that you're insulting them, or that they get personally offended by this. So a good example is I had Tim O'Neill on, and he's fantastic and he's amazing, and he gets shit talked a lot by atheists, and the reason is because his some of what he says that atheists are wrong sometimes because they get something factually wrong about history. And because of that, it's like, well, you're just helping those other people. So if you're not with us, you're against us. And it's like, he's not trying to harm your argument. He's not trying to help their argument either. He's just telling you the fact of the matter that you happen to get wrong. And I think that people build up somebody that they interact with on a blog and on a Twitter account, that they forget that they're a person. So people are like, oh, he's just a nasty troll that's just trying to undercut everything we're saying. And it's like, I had a lovely conversation with him.
it was awesome.
He was great.
Yeah.
Hell, even Gary, I had my conversation with Gary, though long and frustrating, was still amicable.
Yeah, it was amicable.
And at the end of the day, I think we do agree. I just think there's some inconsistencies there. And given time, maybe given a couple more conversations, maybe not even with me, he might come around to something a little bit more consistent. And that doesn't mean right or wrong. It just means consistent.
But there are facts in
Right?
the matter to be had, and like you
have
said,
to agree with me to be consistent, right?
you think, they think that somehow you're helping like a theist with their arguments or creationists with their arguments. It's like, no, but if a creationist says something that is factually correct, why not agree with them? I mean, to deny that, it seems counterintuitive, because at that point, if you're denying something that's actually fact and actually they got something right, what about any argument that you put forth? I mean, it's going to be questioned. So you want to give credit where credit is due on that kind of stuff.
God's auditor making that point. Is this a parallel point to that? It wasn't the same point. It was the same idea applied to whether or not somebody you dislike has done something right or correct. Should you or should you not acknowledge that? Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And in some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. So I would say like the answer to that is far, far more nuanced about whether or not you're going to. I think a lot of the times, if this is somebody that you do not want to interact with, you shouldn't say anything.
Correct.
Because you don't want to encourage them to interact with you further.
Correct.
So if you don't want to interact with that person, you're not obligated to, because they did the bare bones minimum of not being a colossal piece of shit.
Yeah, the bar's so low, but I mean, I'm not going to give credit for that. Yes.
Well, the thing is here you can give them credit by
not doing
anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be my ideal thing. Is I'm not saying anything.
Right. So
that means I'm not giving credit.
But right, you're not disparaging them from saying something, but you're not going to encourage them to interact with you, and that's not the thing that you want, right? You don't want to interact.
I will say this though.
He's got a point, but I think it's Depends on the
Even if
situation.
people I despise, if somebody comes at me and says, "Hey, this person, this, and this," and I know it's not correct,
Convince them of,
I will correct
yeah,
them. I will be like, "No, that's not correct about this person."
yeah.
And I think that we have an obligation to do that because if there's misinformation about a person you don't like, it's not going to be beneficial to anybody. You want
Well,
only
how
the
many
facts
times
out there.
have you consistently done that with me? Every time I'll be like, "Oh yeah, that lawyer," and Steve's like, "He's a lawyer," and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Okay."
Well, I mean, again, because I think in the long run it helps you when one people know that you're always going to give them the truth. You're always going to give them factual information.
Yeah,
But
right.
having misinformation on a person, sure, people will be like, oh well, but they're such an asshole, they deserve it. But in the long run, I think it hurts
Yeah.
you more than it does them because when if I'm not going to call out misinformation, then why would people trust me to call out something that from anybody else? I mean, I have to have consistency there. A couple super chats, and we'll move on to the.
Yep. So we got one from Peter for 5 that says, "You're doing a great job, Steve. Keep up the momentum."
Thank you, Peter.
Aw. Uh, Arnie said for 50 said, you know this, Steve, but it's worth 50, not, what is that?
Kroner.
Kroner. Oh, is that the type of,
Yeah, knock.
to repeat?
Norwegian kroner.
You often are obnoxiously correct,
I
smiley
know.
face.
Yeah, I know this, Arnie. Thank you. Arnie's been around a long time. He has seen a lot.
I'm obnoxiously correct
Yeah.
and smug.
Yeah. Smug. Thanks, Kawasa.
Actually, there's an entire subreddit that has a phrase, or it's called a phrase. Like the title of it is very, very poignant for a lot of the things that we've been talking today, and it's called "Confidently Incorrect."
Yeah, I don't. It is so funny because I mean, I am so not smug, but it is confidently correct in that.
No, incorrect.
Oh, incorrect. Oh, I'm confidently correct because it's like if I tell somebody like 0.9 and repeating was 1, of course I'm going to be confidently correct on that because I cannot be wrong. It metaphysically is impossible. There's only a few things that you cannot be wrong about. One of them is objectivity when it comes to mathematics. I mean, you just can't be wrong on metaphysical necessities. But if somebody wants to try to point it out to you, that's fine, right? But I'm not smug because I happen to tell somebody something that's factual. I mean, it's bizarre. All right, so let's move on here.
You want me to read the next one?
Please.
One of the sticking points to this group of objectivists is the concept of 0.999 repeating equaling 1. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to get into mathematically why the relationship holds or prove it here. Bracket. Take a second to relax by taking a deep breath of relief if needed be here.
People hate math sometimes when they read
Or if
my
needs
blogs.
be. If needs be here. However, I'm going to attempt to discuss some of the conceptual issues I see in relationship to that group of objectivists in regards to their balking at such a relationship.
Now, remember, I do write these at 3 a.m. and I write them pretty quick, so.
Their argument is apparently something along the lines of 0.99 repeating and 1 are different objects and therefore not the same, such that in that saying something like A is not the same as saying A equals A. Logically, of course, that if you were to symbolize A is A, it would be represented as the equality A equals A, using philosophical terminology that they vigorously avoid using, which makes trying to ascertain what they're trying to express vastly more difficult. I would say they arguing
Yeah, they are arguing.
that
I'll fix that.
signifier bracket, the actual string of numbers, word, symbol you are looking at on the page, bracket, end bracket, are different, thus not equal. Whether or not they recognize what is being referenced to both 0.99 repeating and 1 is the same exact referent, in this case, the same exact point or value on the real number line, I do not know, as they are very vague and tend to prevaricate?
Prevaricate.
Prevaricate substantially in answering those types of questions. In either case, what is being signified is the concept or idea that the symbolism or word evokes 0.99 repeating and 1 both convey the concept of the midpoint. I don't know that word at all.
Equidistant. Equally distant.
Equidistant? What does that
Equidistant.
mean?
Equally distant.
Oh, okay. On the interval of 0 to 2.
All right, so I got to throw some commas here later too, because Chester's a comma. She loves commas. So let me explain what I meant by this, because I'm giving them the best possible principle of charity.
Commas.
What I think they're trying to argue is that the symbol, right, the symbolism, are not the same. One's an infinite repeating decimal, one's a terminating. And they're confusing the reference with the referent. They're confusing what is being shown with the value that is being pointed to, right? And so when you're talking about an equal sign, equal doesn't mean that this symbol means this symbol is the same as this symbol. The symbols are completely different, right? There are different types of notation, but there's an equality. There's what's called a equivalence between the two. And this is a lot of thing about mathematics is equivalent classes. They represent the equivalency of classes such that in 0.99 repeating is referencing the number 1 on the real number line, just like the 1 terminating is referencing the real number line. So they're saying the symbol, right, and this symbol are 2 different symbols. Well, yeah, so what? That's not, when you have the equal sign, you're not saying that this symbol means this symbol. What you're saying is there's an equivalency between what this symbol is representing and what this symbol is representing. In other words, if I say cat and gato, English and Spanish, very different languages, but if I say cat equals gato, I am saying they represent the same object, in this case, the animal, feline animal.
That drove me crazy because language immediately undercut anything that they were trying to say. As soon as you moved from mathematics into words, they completely undercut everything. Because at one point I posted a list of the different languages, the number 1 and how it's spoken and how it's written. I guess none of these are the same thing then. Okay, none of these.
It's
count.
Bizarre. I mean, it's funny. They would have a better argument.
No.
They would have a better argument is if they had it in quotes, like quote 999 repeating equals quote 1, might have an argument to be had, because when you have something in quotes, you're talking about that as an object. So if the object is now the reference, if the object is 0.99 repeating, which is the symbol, right, or the signifier, that signifier is not the same as 1. So when they're saying A equals A, right, they're not understanding that A equals A means the object that A is pointing to is equal to the object A is pointing to. So when I have A equals B, if B is the same object as A, they're referencing the same object. That's why we can have relations. And they just seem to not understand that. They think the law of identity is something that's not.
Well, I think that they're so concerned about someone that knows more about the subject than they did being wrong, because they don't value that education. They don't value that knowledge. What they value is being correct. They don't want to be corrected. They just want you to be wrong. And so they're so indignant about it that it makes the conversation almost impossible.
Yes.
It makes it almost impossible to shift through, because asking them a question, if you don't ask it the right way, and at the end of the day, if you've demonstrated that you have more knowledge or more further education of the topic than you do, it doesn't matter how you ask, they'll read it as if it's condescending. They'll read it as they'll read things into it, so that way they don't have to address you or they can dismiss you because you're elitist.
Yeah.
So if you try and figure out and parse out what they're saying, they'll view you and the fact and you trying to do that in any negative way possible, so that way they don't have to either answer the question or they can justify being assholes to you for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think I hope if I remember, I put it in here, but I think I explained identity in here. But real quick, if I have the identity A equals A, if I instantiate A with 1/2 or 0.5 for A, that's still an identity. Identity means I can put anything in for A and it'll still hold. Okay. and 1/2 is equal to 0.5. So if I put in 1/2 on A and 0.5 on A, even though they're different symbols, right? They represent the same thing. That still keeps the identity, right? Even though they're different symbols. But yeah, these are concepts that I think are just escaping them. But anyways, let's move on.
I don't know. I'm not even convinced that the concept would escape. Not wanting to have the conversation because they don't they want to circle jerk. They want to have these conversations forever in circles. And they don't like that there's an answer to the question that they're asking because they don't know what that answer is. And because their question is so deep and so complex and so beyond like, oh, what's on the other side of the sun from us? Like, it's such an arbitrary bullshit fucking question.
I think it's a planet Gore.
So attached to it as it's like a religious person. They're so attached to it as an identity. They identify with this. They identify with being intellectual and deep on these topics, and they don't like when somebody can just walk in and be like, "Well, actually, the answer is this." Oh, well, I guess I wasn't as deep or as smart as I thought I was I?
Yeah, there's a book series.
That makes you feel like an asshole.
There's a book series called Gore, and if I remember correctly, there's like Gore was a planet that was the opposite side of the sun, so we would never see it. Vulcan, Star Trek has something similar too, I think. But yeah, if you ever read the Gorn series by who wrote that? Norman. It was really good. I mean, it was like 30 books he wrote. I read like the first 10 or something. But there was like the Slave Traders of Gorn. Ever heard of that? Really good series. But anyways, all right, sidetrack. All right, so let's continue on. Oh, by the way, did you understand the midpoint equidistant on the interval? So I have the interval 0 and 2, and you include those. Yeah. So the halfway point, that's halfway to 2 and halfway to 0, is 1. 0.9 repeating, same point.
Well, my way of describing it was just what's 1 minus 1? 0. What's 1 minus 0.999 repeating? 0.0000 repeat. So it's 0. So that when you do backwards math, reverse math, it's still come to the same answer.
Yep.
If you're coming to the same answers, then guess what, motherfucker?
Well, some of them would say something stupid like 0.000 ... which makes no sense because
because it doesn't equal that.
Yeah, it doesn't. Well, because 1, you can't have a 1 after an infinite set of zeros. That's nonsensical. Second, that number cannot be constructed. But they don't understand number construction. They don't know what a Dedekind cut is. They don't know what a Cauchy sequence is.
People need to play more D&D because D&D has like some physical infinites in it. So of course they're conceptual because they have to be. But so if you take the wheel goes in and there's a tower and the tower goes up for infinity, and at the top of the tower of infinity is Sigil, the city of doors. Now you cannot get to Sigil by following the tower upwards because it goes upwards forever, but you can get to Sigil through magical portals. So you know it exists and you know where it is, but it's infinitely up, so you can't get there that way. Play more D&D.
All right, continue on. Want me to read it?
Hey. Sorry, Puck's
I'll read. My general impression of their idea of, quote, deep thinking is somewhat a bastard concept of intentionality, in that while mathematically 0.99 repeating and 1 are equal, there's an intentional difference to be had between 0.9 repeating and 1, quote, given the intentional statement or proposition. They're arguing that, quote, A is an identity, and no matter what, which is true, in that no matter what I instantiate A with, there's an equivalence relationship holds that is conveying that an object is itself, while the equivalence A equals A holds mathematically to them. Expressing a mathematical equality of equivalence does not expressly convey that an object is itself, merely that they are the same value. Okay? Well, I'll read the whole thing, then I'll try to explain what I mean by that. To them, I guess, the metaphysical aspect of ontologically, quote, an object is itself, gets lost in translation of something when you try to express A as A mathematically, even though mathematics is a type of metaphysics. So when you say A is A and A equals A, both of those are logically the same statement, right? I mean, A is saying A equals A, but they argue that metaphysically those are different things, and they're not really, because one, mathematics is metaphysics, but two, A is saying that whatever you instantiate A with, you have A. That identity holds, that relationship holds. If I put car is car, dog is dog, cat is cat, car equals car. That's what it's saying for what identity means. And so for some reason, they think that I put 0.99 repeating and 1 into A, I lose identity. Because, well, 1 is 0.9 repeating, the other is 1. They can't be the same A, but they're the same value. That's what A is referring to. And there's something called the indiscernibility of identicals, or identicals of indiscernibility. But what that basically means is that if I have two objects with the exact same properties, spatial, temporally exactly the same, everything is identical about these two objects. They are the same object. Okay? That's kind of what it means. They're the same object. And they use this all the time to determine, if two things are actually the same thing. And so if I have 0.9 and I have 0.9 repeating in 1, or if I have 1/2 and 0.5, it may be a little easier to conceptualize, 1/2 and 0.5, they are the same thing. There's just a different reference, a different symbol being referenced, referring to what they mean. So if I have A equals A and I put 1/2 equals and 0.5, I have the same relationship still. I've not changed anything.
Well, so let's say, for example, if I'm speaking and I'm using, or if I'm typing out a sentence and I'm saying this and this, right? So I'm making like a list of two things. So I had a burger and French fries. If I use the word and, you understand what it means. If I use a plus sign, you understand what it means. And if I use the and symbol, you know what I mean. You know what it means. So there's 3 ways of saying the exact same thing, because you're talking about mathematics is the same way. It's a language in that regard. Just because you don't understand the language does not mean that these words or these symbols cannot be interchangeable. It just, your lack of understanding does not change whether or not these things are or are not the way they are in mathematics.
Right.
Philosopher 5, why does this remind me of Father equals Son equals Holy Ghost, but they're actually not equal?
Yeah, no, dude, Kawasa, I'll never understand the Trinity. I've never have in my life.
I've never understood it. Arnie said, for 50 said, Saiten said, I'm dead is not necessarily a false statement. Discuss.
That's a whole different thing, Arnie. And I know what he's referring to. It's called,
sure. You can be dead on the inside.
Now, what Saiten is trying to say, what's called a performance contradiction, right? To say I'm dead is a performance contradiction because the mere act of saying it means I have to be alive to say it. So it's a performance contradiction.
It's like answering the question, are you asleep, with yes.
Yeah. Well, you could subconsciously be asleep and involve, some kind of, but anyways.
You could be conscious and still asleep.
But I before we get to like the rest of the blog, to kind of give you a precursor, because maybe it helps to understand where I was going with this particular paragraph when it comes to intentionality. The symbols themselves, like and I'll use fractions and decimal because I think this is easier conceptually. So 1/2, 0.5. Even though those values are the same, there is an intentionality difference in that if I say Chesh, and then we'll get to the rest of the blog where this makes more sense. But if I say Chesh, 1/2 is a fractional notation. Is that proposition true?
If you say what?
1/2 is fractional notation. It's in a fraction, 1/2, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right. But 1/2 is co-referential to 0.5, right? They mean the same thing, correct?
Yes.
So if I take out 1/2 and I put into the co-reference, right, the co-referential 0.5, in that same proposition, now I have 0.5 is fractional notation. Now that proposition is no longer true.
Right, because you've added them both in.
Well, no, because there's an intentional difference to be had. If I say 1/2 is, if something, because I've changed the truth value of the proposition. So, right. Yeah. So that's why there's an intentional difference between 0.9 repeating and 1. But they're not understanding that kind of concept. They're not understanding that if I have a proposition where if I change with something that's co-referential, that I change the truth value of that proposition such that 1/2 is a fractional notation, becomes 0.5 is a fractional notation. I've went from a true proposition to a false proposition, even though those values are the same. Those are the complexities of philosophy.
Yeah.
Okay, but I wanted to get that out before we go further because I think a lot of people might get confused on intentional states.
You drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, well, again, this is not easy stuff. I mean, it's not really trying to parse some of this stuff out. But anyways, let's move on to Leibniz law.
Okay, so
Like you call it Leibniz. I've heard people. I call him Leibniz, but I think people call him German as Leibniz.
Leibniz
Leibniz.
law.
I think it's Leibniz. That's how I've always pronounced it as Leibniz, but who the hell knows?
Leibniz. There's no T. Law or identity of indiscernibility states that if two objects have the exact same properties, then they are the same object or more. Basically, the law of identity that A equals A
For all of A.
for all of A equals A. For any A or all of A, the equation A equals A holds true. More formally, we can express it as this. If X equals Steve McRae and Y equals myself, referring explicitly to me here, then since Steve McRae and myself have all of the exact same properties, F, then we are in fact the same object. Objectivists in that group denied two objects can have the same exact properties and thus be the same object, but I think failed to recognize what was really being expressed by the concept of the identity of indiscernibles. Steve McRae and myself are two different objects as they are intentionally different, but extensionally equal in that they both refer to the same object person writing this blog post.
Yeah, and
explained, right?
Yeah, and let me try to explain why. And by the way, that should be actually, I think, intentional with an S. But I do explain the difference between intention with an S and different with a T. But the reason why that holds the case is that the two objects, right? First of all, the upside down A means for all of, right? So for all of A equals A. For anything you put in A, instantiate it, you're going to have the same thing. Right? Car equals car, dog equals dog. So what this equation says is for all of X and for all of Y, for all properties, F is properties, for all properties, for the F of X and F of Y, so any property that is for X and Y have shared exactly the same properties, they're the same object, right? X equals Y.
I feel like when you're writing out an equation like that, you should write out a legend.
I have that in my other blogs, though. All this has been explained in my other blogs.
Add a link, bro.
Yeah, maybe.
Make it blue.
I'll throw a link in this, but yeah, I actually explained this in another blog, but yeah, what it's saying is X equals Y. Steve McRae equals myself, even though there's an intentional difference to be had because so you could say, hey, let's say I have a nickname. Well, I'll get into this using Clark Kent, but we'll get into that. But I hope people understand that Steve McRae and myself are two different objects, right? They're the same object, though, because of the same properties.
Okay, by the objectivist logic that we're talking about, you wouldn't be able to write anything in the first person ever.
Yeah.
Done. End of conversation. You cannot say, I think this, because I would not be equal to your name or yourself.
All right, continue on.
By this logic, at least.
Given them.
Yeah, but given the maximum principle of charity here, let's perhaps try to suss out more their apparent argument by first explaining
intentionality. They're pronounced the same way.
Intentionality and intentionality.
Right, one with an S. I see. I put one.
Oh, they're bold. They're
bold.
Slightly
right.
bold.
Right.
Okay.
Now, a lot of times you might see italicized to show the difference. But I put it bold so it shows it better.
Maybe capitalize them.
But yeah, there's two different words. They mean different things.
Intentionality and intentionality. In philosophy, words like thought, idea, concept have intentionality, as they are signifiers that connote by some definition, a property or quality about something else and are construed to be intentional objects. For example, I'm so not used to seeing intentional spelt with an S.
Yeah, it's a hard concept too. Yeah.
For example, you can have a thought about something, while physical objects cannot. They merely have existential
Extensionality.
extensionality. Why? My brain today. Extensionality in space. I used up all my luck today playing Beat Saber. That's what I did. That's what happened. I used up all my brain power doing what I did earlier today. In space and time, but they themselves have no intentional states. One of the things that came up in discussion with this group was a claim that humans being apes is a metaphysical necessity. I am going to avoid going into the several bad and hopefully obvious athletic, modally,
Alaic.
what? Oh,
Alaic.
alaic.
Yeah.
That has an H in it. That's a TH. That's a sound.
Alaic. It just means possible, necessary, possible. Those are different types of modes.
Alaic modality issues here. As if that claim were true, then in every possible world, humans must be apes, even though human being apes is categorical and contingent.
Yeah. So let me explain the difference between an intention thing. If I have an intention, I have intention about something, right? With a T. So with a T, if I say I believe you exist, I believe there's some concept there. There's something that I believe in, right? There's something that I have intent, right? So intentionality with a T is intent. So I believe you exist means that I believe, and there must be something that I believe in. I love, there must be something that I love. I hate, there must be something that I hate. There's an intentional state that my mind has. Well, those are called intentional with the T verbs. Intentionality is a little bit different, though. That means particular properties for an entire set of things that'd be necessary and sufficient. And I put this into the bottom, by the way. Necessary and sufficient to have described all members of that group. For example, all unmarried men are bachelors. Unmarried men is both necessary and sufficient to describe a bachelor, right? So it's something that will describe or give properties or qualities about something else to describe the complete set of things with an S. That's with an S. It's very difficult to because it's so they're related to each other, but there's a distinct difference between the two. Intentionality means you have an intention for something. I believe you exist, right? But intention is properties. It's dealing with a specific reference to what is necessary and sufficient to describe a referring term to an object.
I don't think my brain is doing this today. I understand what you mean, but I don't. I think this is one of these situations where I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch the stream because, like, my brain did not like. I'm following, but I don't think I'm gonna retain anything.
Well, let me get into the whole ape thing because they're saying that humans have to be apes, and there's a problem with this. One, there's no metaphysical necessity for that. Two, ape is a group. Ape and monkeys are groups. They're not.
Yeah, it has not. It's how we label something. It's not what.
It's not even a taxonomic classification. It's just a grouping.
Right.
But humans being apes are only monophyletically true. Paraphyletically, we're not apes, and so it depends on what we mean. And so to say that humans must be apes is not true because if you're speaking paraphyletically, that does not hold. And they didn't seem to understand what the hell I meant by that. And any taxonomist person, any biologist would understand, well, yeah, we're only monophyletically apes if you hold in phylogeny that you retain your ancestry. But sometimes there are reasons why you take that out.
Being elitist and just making shit up, and it's like, no, I'm not. That's just the way it is. I just don't think you understand the well, what do you mean I don't understand? You're calling me stupid. You're a bad man. You're harassing
Well, the same thing with animals, right? A lot of times when we describe something as an animal, we're talking about a brute animal. We're taking humans out of that category, right?
Well, if you say a fish,
same thing.
Depending on what context I'm talking about, I could be talking about all marine life that isn't a plant. And even then, I might not be including crustaceans, or maybe I am including crustaceans.
Well, we're fish monophyletically. Humans are fish monophyletically.
Am I including humans?
Yeah.
Right? Am I including alligators? Am I including things that tend to spend a lot of time in the water? I might be. I might be including something that should be classified differently, like say a dolphin. I might just be being lazy, for all anybody knows. But like depending on the if I say I don't like fish, and you don't have any context for what I'm talking about, and well, the conversation I'm actually having is referring specifically to seafood, then I might actually be including oyster and shrimp, and so I'm saying I don't like fish, but I'm also including scallops and
Yeah, there's a reason why we have these words, right?
other things you wouldn't necessarily consider fish.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we again, there's connotations. If I say,
Nuance.
yeah, if I say humans are fish, I'm connoting the fact that I'm talking monolithically, right? So again, there's no metaphysical necessity that we must have been apes. So it's contingent on how we're utilizing the conditions to what categorizes somebody as an ape.
And tree feline makes a good point. I think a lot of taxonomy wouldn't even use the word fish.
Yeah, because again, fish is a group. Yeah.
Yeah.
They would use what is it?
And so if you're not studied or versed in this, and somebody who is says actually no, then they have two choices, well, three choices. They either ignore the person, which makes them look like a douchebag, or they berate the person for knowing more than they do, which makes them look like a douchebag, or they accept that, oh, okay, well, in this sense, yeah, sure, you're right, but that's not what I mean. Here's what I mean. But being able to say here's what I means that you actually have to be able to explain your position, and these people can't do that.
I mean, I think that have more argument. I think we're lobe-finned fish, right? I think it's Chiroptegae. Is it what we're under, Chiroptegae? I wish Jackson Wheat when you need him, but I think we're Chiroptegae. But
Jackson.
But anyways, however, the intention of the word human, the intention of the word human, denotes a well-being with the specific properties. If what we have arbitrarily, this was another point of contention by them, not accepting the properties of being human are human construction of arbitrary conditions. We assign to what we call the word human. For example, human connotes an object with the properties of being multicellular, chemoheterotropic, bipedal, living, animal, eukaryotic, etc. If I can list every property of what is constitutive of what we mean by human, I would have what's called an object of comprehension, which is the totality of intentions which give meaning to what we have arbitrarily prescribed to meet the conditions of what we call an object human. If we could list these properties, we would have an extensional set, which would also describe what it would be referred to be by the word human. So in other words, I can list things two ways. I can list every property that's required to adequately describe what it means to be human. Okay? That'd be extensionally, right?
Yep.
Or I can have a necessary and sufficient condition that would be constitutive of all humans. For example, when I use the proposition all the states of America, right? That means the set of all the states, right?
Well, I would then ask, does that include like the territories?
No, just the states, not like Puerto Rico and
yeah. So if I were to say all the provinces in Canada, most people in Canada, when they say that, also include the territories. They also mean those territories, because we don't treat our territories really any differently the same way America does.
Yeah, right? That's true. Yeah, but by saying all the states of America,
a Canadian might assume that you mean.
That's an intentional proposition, in such that the proposition P is intentional, in that it connotes the extensional set of the proposition of California, Alabama, and New Florida. By the way, that's not a true proposition, by the way. But I wanted to make a point that the extension, it should be actually a set rather than a proposition. Because that all of the states of America is necessarily sufficient to describe all the other states, everything, all the states combined. That set of all the states of America is equal to the extensional set of each one individually enumerated. Right. Makes sense? So I have two sets. They're equal to each other as far as their extensionality. They're equal to each other, but intentionally they're different, because one is just all the states of America and the other one is the listing of all the states of America. So there's right. a difference in the propositions. Right. By the way, that isn't a true proposition, but If P here contained all the 50 states. Both sets describe the same exact thing. However, they are clearly not the same literal proposition. Mathematical functions would be similar. If we had an algorithm, I just took this from Wiki. If we have the algorithms using for Wiki for some example, to find f of n, first add 5 to n, then multiply by 2. To find g of n, first multiply by 2, then add 10. And whatever we have for n, those are going to give the two same results. As you guys can see them outside. Hard for me to see this.
You have it small?
Yeah. I told you my monitor's got all messed up.
I scrolled up a little bit too high. Now you scrolled down.
I got it. All right. So both f of n and g of n are extensionally the same. For what value you put in for n, you'll get the same result. However, they're intentionally different in that they refer to the same process for determining n. This was critical in that, again, they're not understanding that 0.99 repeating in 1 or 1/2 and 0.5 are extensionally the same but intentionally different because they can change the value of a proposition. Those two functions are different. They describe different functions, but extensionally they're the same because they always give the same values. But I can't take this function and just stick it in this function and say, or stick it in a proposition and say it's the exact same thing, right?
Right.
If I said proposition is, if I say the function is to add 5 to n, then multiply by 2, uses addition first. Okay, use addition first. That proposition would be true. But if I put the g of n in, that proposition becomes false now because it doesn't use addition first. It uses multiplication first, right?
Right.
So even though their values are the same, I can't just take this function in a proposition and replace it with the coreferential g of n because they're intentionally, with an s, different. Hope that makes sense. This is hard stuff to describe. All right.
It basically just means that there's more than one way to do the equation. This function or this function. This one is called f. This one is called g. You can't, if you say that this is a function and this is a function. Yes, they're the same thing. They do the same thing. They mean the same thing, except this function does this and this function does this.
They're extensionally the same, but intentionally different.
So you can't just take one and put it into the other because you will get a different answer at the end of the function because the function does things in a different order.
Because there's intentionality difference, yes. So these intentional differences are such that you can't always directly exchange f of n for g of n in an intentional proposition. Intentional propositions are such that at least one case, replacing coextensive expressions will change the truth value of the proposition. A canonical way of explaining this to use the proposition is given by, and this is important because they balked at this. The proposition Lois Lane believes that Superman can fly is true. They're like, well, there's no such thing as Superman in reality, therefore that proposition is meaningless. And it's fine if you want to accept that type of understanding, but most of philosophy is built upon using examples like this in a fictionalism or useful fictionalism type state.
It uses this example to make it easier to understand. Like, it's obviously not true like in reality. However, we're going to treat it as if it is so we can make sure our logic functions.
But remember objectivism, right? Objectivism is like, oh, there's nothing corresponds to reality. It's an error. So you can't say Lois Lane believes anything because Lois Lane doesn't have anything that exists in reality. That's their mindset. They just poo-poo on the entire realm of propositional logic when they do that. Well, in this case, it's predicate logic.
It doesn't have to be Lois Lane and Superman. It could be Steve believes that Chesh can fly.
Well, yeah, but I exist though. You exist, right? So that.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But right? Here, so Lois Lane doesn't exist.
Lois Lane and Superman are interchangeable things. So, like, maybe I can make this clear. In Atlas Shrugged, in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, trains don't matter. They're just a proxy to explain that there are problems with the business and why there are problems and what the
train's running on time.
Talking about. The trains are irrelevant. You can take out trains and put in airplanes. You can take out airplanes, you can put in cars. Now, you know what that makes them? Intentionally different, but the same.
Yeah, it's good. That's a really good point. Yeah.
Look, we used the thing. We used the thing we just did.
The trains have to... Well, I don't remember the exact statement they used, but it wasn't something like, if I remember the book, the trains have to run on time or something.
Well, that's part of the reason why the one of the train companies is failing is because the trains are not running on time.
Yeah,
And so because they're not running on time, they're going to lose contracts.
yeah.
That's one of the big problems, which is like this is stupid. But you can replace trains with anything that needs to run on buses, anything that needs to run on a schedule. But you get believe it or not, you could take it out and replace it with ice cream, an ice cream stand, and just change the
Well, yeah, but those aren't
problem.
co-referential though.
Right. They are if you use something that has to be on time, if you keep all of the major points the same. But in a novel, you could actually take out and replace any business.
Well, yeah,
This
no,
business is having problems because business.
that's an, but that okay, I do
But,
understand. I
but the
do.
problem is that they're losing business. The reason why they're losing business is mostly inconsequential.
Yeah, I do see what you're saying, but that's an analogy. It's not the same
Yeah,
as exactly what I'm talking about because a co-referential
right,
are the same object, right? Me, Steve McCrae,
right.
and myself are the same object. Superman and Clark Kent are the same object.
Right. So if you were to replace the trains, the concept remains the same, but the object changes. They're equal in the concept of what's going on. So if you replace trains with planes,
But they're not co-referential. That would be different.
no, correct.
Yeah.
However, what they are is they're interchangeable. You can interchange these things and you have the same
Yeah,
result.
but that's an analogy. I get what you're saying, but that's an analogy. It's not the same thing as intentional
Yes.
states because intentional states have to be again. Well, let's move on, and I'll show you. I get what
I
you're saying.
tried.
Yeah,
I almost got it.
so close.
So what would be? Would
All
it
right,
be a different
all right.
train line if you were to say this train line and this train line?
No, like for example, I'm trying. Car, train, and locomotive. Those mean the same thing, right? They're co-referential. Would you
Oh,
agree?
okay.
Locomotive. If I say train has 5 letters,
Uh-huh.
and I put in the word locomotive instead of train, and I have locomotive has 5 letters, that clearly changes
Right,
the
even though
proposition.
they're the same thing, they do not equal the same thing in that sense.
Correct.
So it makes the statement false, even though a train and a locomotive are the same thing.
That's exactly what
Got
intentional
it.
thinks. Now,
I understand.
all right. So in this particular case, and again,
I understand
this is
nothing.
canonical. This is why they were balking at this. I'm like, well, this is again they poo-poo on philosophy because they're like, oh, this is stupid because Lois Lane doesn't exist. So why using it as a reference because she doesn't exist in reality? Oh my God.
Maybe this example is a good one that. Oh yeah, car and automobile.
Yeah. If I say car has 3 letters,
What
that's-
about if you were to use different car brands?
No.
Dodge and Ford.
because Ford is a type of car, it's a subset. They're not
Oh, okay.
co-referential.
So as soon as you go into subset, it becomes too
Yeah.
nuanced.
We're talking about a co-referential, meaning the same car and
What if I
automobile
said
mean
a
the same thing.
car and a Toyota?
No,
So wouldn't apply.
no.
But
I mean,
a Toyota is a car.
you think about it this way. It's a type of car, but not all cars are Toyotas. You have to have the same. You have to be referring to the same
Oh,
object.
so it has to apply to the whole.
Yeah, the same object or same group.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. All right. So in this particular case, if however Lois Lane doesn't know Clark Kent is Superman, which she doesn't in the early on, even if co-referential, that if you substitute Clark Kent for Superman into the proposition P, you end up with P. Lois Lane believes Clark Kent could fly. That's a false statement, though. She doesn't believe that, right? Because she doesn't know Clark Kent is Superman. It changes the truth value from T to F, as she doesn't know Clark Kent is Superman. That's an intentional difference. With an S. It's an intentional difference. I
Yes.
believe Superman can fly. That is with intentional with a T. This is where it's critical with a T. That I'm thinking, I'm having a mental context about something, right? I believe Superman can fly is a mental context about something with a T. There's an intentional state with a T. And intentional with an S is that in thinking that Superman can fly doesn't mean that I'm thinking Clark Kent can fly, even though they are the same thing. If if Superman loves Lois Lane, that would be intentional with a T. As Superman Superman has an intentional verb loves, right? It's intentional with a T with respect to some object, in this case Lois Lane. So these terms, intentional with an S and intentional with a T, are very similar. But there's a distinct difference to be had. Again, one is I'm having a mental context about something, and the other means that if I have a co-referential thing that I'm thinking about, it may not be the same thing. I could be thinking Superman can fly. I believe Superman can fly, But if I don't know Superman's Clark Kent, by substituting Clark Kent into that statement, it changes the proposition. All right,
Yeah.
we're muddling through here.
I like the cars and automobiles and trains and locomotives
That's fine.
example better.
Yeah.
But this one works.
Yeah, well,
I understand.
Yeah, think about it. Like I said, car is 3 letters, but you can replace car with automobile because they mean the same thing, but that proposition now becomes false because there's an intentional difference. Yeah.
Right.
The tree fig guy says, is a bit with transparency and opaque stuff. Yes, matter of fact, when it comes to propositional opacity and transparency, that's exactly what this is. If the propositional value doesn't change, it is transparent. If it does change, it's opaque. So yes, and it gets very much into propositional transparency and opacities. All right, so are we running late? You want to finish this up tomorrow? We're at 2 hours. We could do this on Caffeine Corner the rest of it.
Well, we're at 2 hours, but we've only got like 3 paragraphs left.
All right.
We already went through Superman, so if we jump to there exists an X that Superman loves, which we already covered, and then so going back to the objectivist would be where we're at technically, because you kind of just explained 1, 2, 3 paragraphs of stuff.
Well, I'll read it real quick. So, if this,
I don't think we need to. We kind of covered it, didn't we?
all right. So we'll skip the quantifiers. Although I do think
you want
what's that?
Last paragraph of the quantifiers? Because like the last paragraph is means there exists X Superman loves with here Lois Lane. So and then just start at the existential qualifier.
Go ahead.
Oh, E, or however that's pronounced.
Backwards E.
Here does not imply existence. It does not mean that Superman in fact exists or has intentional states. This was another conceptual issue in the group of objectivists, in that they balked at using Superman in a proposition merely because Superman is a fictitious object with no real-world reference that exists. Objectivists apparently believe that there is no object in reality that some concept points to. Then that concept is somehow in error of some kind, almost like some type of radical form of correspondence theory of truth. It seems to be just like people who don't like hypotheticals.
Yeah, it's weird that they just don't. I don't know. It's odd that they think that way. But backwards E is basically that there exists one example of basically there exists such as. So if I have EX backwards E, it's called an existential. Well, A is universal quantification and E is existential quantification. But doesn't mean that it exists.
Therein lies why you would run into some serious problems if you tried to have a discussion about any kind of theoretical physics, or just kind of physics in general. So like the Higgs boson, we had to stick a number in there for a while because we couldn't demonstrate it, we couldn't see it, we didn't know how to see it.
But they got it right.
But we knew it was there. Mathematically, we knew it was there. And guess what? We were eventually able to show it. Whereas these people would say, no, it doesn't exist. That number's not real. Everything that you're doing with physics that involves that number, it doesn't count. You can't do that.
Neutrinos were the same way.
We would never discover anything.
Yeah, neutrinos were the exact same way. When they said, hey, look, we have energy coming out of this particle that we can't account for. It has to be going somewhere. There's a particle, we'll call it the neutrino. That wasn't discovered till well after that they knew it had to exist.
Well, it's like, I mean, if you were to work backwards, so this is why objectivism does not seem to appear to work to me, is that it does not apply. As soon as you start applying it backwards, it doesn't follow. If we were to operate as if objectivism were the way we were going to deal with reality, we wouldn't. Fire doesn't exist until somebody makes it, or until something catches on fire by accident, I guess. Or lava doesn't exist until people experience or see lava. Well, no, it still exists. We don't have to experience it to, like, you can go to an island that didn't used to exist and know that it was formed via, like, geological history. I don't know how an objectivist would handle geological history or geology. Like how
they would say that it existed at some time, but I think they would get very, very bogged down when they start getting into presentism, expanding. Was it expanding cube theory for the universe? What is that? A theory of time, B theory of time, expanding what was that? And I don't understand it, so I'm not going to tend to. There's a presentism and other types of theories of time where things don't exist except in the moment, right? Right now they exist, but historically things don't exist anymore. But period of time, all of the future and all the past exist. The history still exists. It's still there. It's just we don't have access to it any longer.
Oh my God. So, but even if you were to do that, you'd still run into problems moving forward from this time period. Because whether we like it or not, we experience time linearly.
Yes,
We
but
don't have a choice
they
at
would,
a moment.
but would they deny
So,
history? Would they say that that history doesn't exist? Because to a B theorist of time, history still exists. Future exists. Everything that ever happened or has happened exists. It is already there. We just haven't experienced it yet, or we can't go back and experience something. But it's still
okay, so
there.
maybe my question is unclear. I don't mean to ask like how they would deal with history, as in like the existence of history. I think what I mean is how would they deal with the mechanics of how we decide what, like how we analyze the information we have to make decisions about what did happen.
Oh, I get you. So you're okay. So I see what you're saying. You're saying is that, for example, we can have objective facts about math, but a lot of things about history, we have to have some kind of assumptions that, first of all, what we learned about the history is true. You know, like for example, Lincoln was a president. We weren't alive then, right?
Right.
So
I don't know how, especially as like the further and further back you go, I imagine that for an objectivist that would get more and more difficult to accept.
ask them. That would be a good question to ever ask them.
I can't ask them. They won't let me ask
No,
anything.
not them specifically, but find if we ever find objectivists that can actually answer questions, it'd be great.
Okay, noted.
Ah,
All right, so going back to the objectivist argument against 0.999 repeating equals 1, while some accepting it as mathematically equal but deny it being true due to metaphysical reason, or A is A, they are trivia, I can't say it.
trivially.
That was my tongue getting stuck, not my brain this time. Trivially, a rather clumsily and ineffectually trying to argue that 0.999 repeating and 1 are different symbols and, well, co-referential are intentionally different. So this is exactly what we were talking about with 1, uno, each.
Yes. Yes.
Those all mean the same thing, but according to these objectivists in particular, no, they aren't.
and by the way, that you are so spot on with that. So if I said to you, Cheshire, cat is Spanish, and you'd be like, no, it's not, but it means gato. Wait, gato and cat are co-referential. They mean the same thing, but their symbols are different. Their language is different, but they reference the same fucking type of object. That's what they're not understanding.
Unless you go to French, where gâteau means cake.
Does it?
Yeah.
That's what they're not understanding. That the symbolism, like gâteau and cat, yes, they're different letters, they're different symbols, they're different signifiers. So what? That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about the law of identity. We're talking about, do they reference the same object? Yes. 0.99 repeating and 1 reference the same object on the real number line.
Mathematics is a language. It functions the same way. Those are, what was that, referential? If I say language, math can be included in that category. French is a language, math is a language. They're a language. Latin is a language. That you can have dead languages, but mathematics is a language. So there are things within mathematics that can be said in different ways to get the same thing.
Yes. Yes.
Whoa.
Yes.
Is that a thing? So this is where you get into your yes or no questions. Can words mean the same thing but be different words in multiple languages? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Of course it can. Is mathematics a language? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
In a certain way.
Therefore,
yes.
Mathematics can have terms and different ways of saying the same thing and giving the same expression. You're welcome.
Yeah. I mean, and again, that paragraph that I wrote, I think is them in a nutshell. If you can forget everything else I wrote, but the part about going back to the objectivist, I think that is their argument in a nutshell. I really do.
do a clip of that thing I just did and just
But
start sending that. Just clip it and send that clip.
for example, cosine 0 is equal to 1. Okay?
Uh-huh.
But if I say cosine 0 is a trigonometric function, and that is a true statement. But if I say 1 is a trigonometric function, that statement is now false, even though they're co-referential. Cosine 0 and 1 mean the same thing, though. They're extensionally the same because they point to the same object. And no matter how many times I repeat it, none of them are going to understand that concept because it's a difficult concept to grasp between intensional with an S and extensional properties and states.
Right.
And so even though if I say I could put cosine 0 all over the place and I get 1. It's 1. It's the same thing. It means 1. But they'll say, well, that doesn't look. It's different. It's using a trigonometric function. So what?
Damn it.
Oh.
It's a matter of consistency because I get the feeling that they would agree about language, but for some reason they treat mathematics differently for some reason. What
Maybe.
reason? I don't fucking know.
But this is why I wrote this, and I'll go back and I'll edit a little bit. It needs a little cleaning up, I've noticed, in some commas and stuff. And I'll fix this. But again, I write these at 3 o'clock in the morning. But the gist of it is that they're looking at something and they're just looking at the signifier and they're not looking at what it signifies. And so you have, in a referential statement, you have the reference and then you have the efferent. The referent is the object. And
It's
that's what they're
spelled
missing.
the same thing.
All right, so let's push through this. For example, p equals 0.9 repeating is a repeating decimal. It's true, however, if I replace it with the quality 1, you have 1 is a repeating decimal, which is false, even though they are co-referential. That's their argument. This is what they're talking about when it comes to metaphysics. Again, my best interpretation of their argument. But do you know how many of them try to explain it this way? 0.
I don't understand that. I'm not sure that they're using the term metaphysics in the same way most
Probably not.
of the people we deal with use the term metaphysics.
Probably not.
I would go out on a limb and say that if they have their own nebulous word for logic and reality, then I would be willing to bank that it's probably the same with metaphysics.
Yeah, I agree
also.
with you because math clearly is metaphysics. It deals with abstractions, and abstractions are metaphysics. Existence is metaphysics. Yeah, I don't understand how they can say it's not.
Philosophy, not mathematics. Okay, let's talk about philosophy. What do you mean you're using philosophical terms?
Oh, I see. Well, that goes back to like, atheism is not a philosophical term.
Oh, we're talking about religion, not philosophy.
Yeah. It's like, wait a minute. Doesn't atheism have to do with the existence of God? Isn't existence metaphysics? Yes. Go to Unicorn for to New Zealand. The comma will not be ignored. Hey, I do use Oxford commas, by the way. So I do use Oxford comma. All right. So all right, muddle through this, and then I'll have a question.
The truth value of P has changed by this substitution, which means the proposition is referentially opaque, such that even though 0.999 repeating and 1 refer to the same mathematical value, you can not always merely substitute in one or the other in given intentional propositions. Why? This
is a hard shit.
I take a drink every time I fuck that up.
This is hard. It's not easy. I know. I had to write this.
This to me, however, is a very trivially true argument at best and does not outweigh the claim that 0.999 repeating equals 1 is false, as so many of them make. And many of them do argue mathematically that 0.99 repeating is less than 1, which wrong prima facie. Is it facie or facie?
Yeah, which is wrong.
Facie?
Yeah, facie.
Regardless of what petty and trivial metaphysical arguments they try to bring to the table. Yeah, I did notice. I did notice that a lot of the time they were complaining about how, oh well, we're not talking about the issue anymore. But at every single chance they got, when whatever they were saying was challenged, not rudely by any means, just that if they were challenged, if somebody said, well, what about this? They were like, oh no, you're just not talking about the topic anymore.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're dead on. Drove me nuts. And so. Yeah, in an intentional proposition, yes. If I put in 0.9 repeating in 1, they could actually change that. But that's, again, they're missing the point that it's referring to the same value. And so they're confusing the intentionality of the proposition with the value mathematically. This is where they get into the metaphysics versus the mathematics. And they're clumsily trying to argue this, I think. Again, let me ask you guys this. This is my question to you guys before I do the the superscripts real
I
quick, just to
couldn't
get out of the
figure out
way.
what the hell they were trying to say. And
This is
anytime I asked them anything, they got mad.
Dude, I had to rack my brain out for this to try to even come up with the best possible way of looking at this. But I want to ask my audience, do you guys agree, given all things considered from what you've seen on Twitter, that my interpretation of their argument is the best interpretation maybe that they are trying to argue?
It's the best that I've found that I can understand. Like I can understand what you're thinking that they're saying and how you came to that conclusion. I don't know if that's what they're saying,
I can't
but
know
it is
either,
the best argument that I've seen for what it is. It is by all intents and purposes a steel man. Of
Yes.
You're trying your best to steel man what you think they're trying to say.
I appreciate
And if
that.
I were them, I would take this and start trying to understand and to build on it, so maybe they'll be able to fill in some of the gaps or some of the things that we're not quite getting, and maybe they can actually hammer down something that they can define.
Yeah, that's the perfect way. This is literally a steel man of their argument. If this is an argument, it could be a lot of them could say, no, that wasn't an argument. Okay, then what the hell are you talking about then?
Please explain to me, please.
Yeah. All right.
God's auditor said that the best possible interpretation of their argument is stranger danger.
All right, let me read these real quick, then we'll get the super chats. I want to point out, we don't do any empirical testing on mathematics, right? It's not an empirical subject. We don't do empirical checking on premises, axioms, or postulates in math. As Russell argued, we don't even start out when evaluating if an initial assertion or premise is in pure math is true or not. We proceed on the premise of if it was true. And that's a big thing on math. Your premises we assume are true for an argument, and thus you can have reasons to show that your premise is false. But in mathematics, you assume that the premises are axiomatic. You're putting them forth as if they are true. They're axiomatic assumptions. So you don't prove an axiom is true. You don't. Now, could you? In some cases, in some types of logics and mathematics, from what I understand, you can. But generally speaking, if you posit something as an axiom, you don't have to justify it. Most of them are non-justifiable, and they're non-provable. They're just assumptions to be made. If they are true, then this follows mathematically, right? So any proof you do, and you have an axiom, if they were true, this would follow, right? That's how you would go about trying to evaluate if an initial assertion or premise in mathematics is true or not. Anyways, even said, quote, it is essential not to discuss whether the first proposition is really true. And the reason that is critical, I think, is when I even put forth my arguments out there, the worst way you can analyze any proof, mine or anybody else's, the worst possible way to do it is to say you haven't proven your first premise. At that point, you don't have a clue how to analyze anything because the first premise is not proven. It's assumed to be the case. Now, you don't have to accept it. You can say, look, I don't think your first premise is sound, right? You don't have to. You can say, yeah, if it's true, then yes, it's logically is valid. But
you can have something completely logically follow, but come to something incorrect. So if I say all cats are assholes, and I have a cat, therefore my cat is an asshole, I have logically followed. However, it may be the case that not all cats are assholes. Yeah,
and that's again the difference between validity and soundness. But when people start arguing to me, well, you haven't proven your first assumption, I'm not even going to address what you have to say. I'm just not. It's just you're just a complete waste of time.
They're just not.
Yeah,
they're already too many steps back, and they need to catch up to the conversation, or you need to start back at the beginning. And at the end of the day, and we've covered this. I think we've talked about this before. How many times do you have to start a conversation over and over and over again to get every single person that comes to you with this argumentation before you're like, listen, I've explained this. Here's my videos on it. Go watch those. And
but that's why they think that's why they think we're smug. It's like, no, we're not smug. We're just. Look, you have.
How many times can we be expected?
You need to start. They need to do some of the work. They need to start. And I can't do it for them. But anyways,
the same thing with atheism, right?
Yes.
The atheism agnostic thing. It's like we've explained this ad nauseum. We're gonna move on from this conversation and move on to the next steps of that conversation. You're welcome to catch up. Here's the videos to.
I think that's a most of our conversations anymore, though. Don't you think? Yeah. Number 2, this is my word of the day. This is the way I describe this. This is my own wording, but it's taken off different things. But I wanted to get in one tweet. Intentional with an S, specifying necessary and sufficient conditions for a referential term, specifying properties, or giving a set of attributes for a referent object. Again, all unmarried men are bachelors. Unmarried men is both necessary and sufficient to reference an object of a bachelor. Now, if I had asked you, let's go back and do a kind of a check on what we understand here. If I say unmarried men is both necessary and sufficient, I can say all unmarried men are bachelors. That would be an intentional proposition. If I wanted to write that set out extensionally, what would that set look like? What do you think?
Like if you could replace...
I want to describe the set. If I say all unmarried men are bachelors, I'm describing all bachelors, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If I wanted to extensionally write out the set of all bachelors, how would I do that?
Wouldn't you just say all unmarried men?
No, I would just say every bachelor there is. So my extensional set would... Right. So if I could theoretically list a set where every element was a bachelor, I would say these are the set of all unmarried men are bachelors. And so they would be the equivalent set, right? So all unmarried men are bachelors, or if I had all the set of all men that are bachelors, that would be the extensional set.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if I just say unmarried men or bachelors, there'd be the equivalent set.
Yeah, you use one or the other, and they would be interchangeable.
Yeah. Just like the set of all 50 states, if I write them extensionally, they mean the same thing, right? They have the same amount of elements. Yeah, they have the same amount of elements. And then human beings are apes is arbitrary as a part of an extensional set. Monophyletically, we are apes. Blah blah blah. So, anyways, that's all I want to do with that. We can do the super chats and kind of wrap it up.
Go for it.
All right, Arnie, 50 more knock, 50 kroners for cat space, comma. Yeah, I'll throw in some more comma. I'll go back and there's a couple things I got to change. I've noticed, but again, I write these late, and that's why I kind of go over these things to edit them and correct them. Kawasa for 10,001, quote, objectivism is a philosophy you end up when you apply reason and the scientific method to the question of who you are and what you should do next, what they think to themselves, LOL. Again, I'm trying not to be disparaging, but I don't understand 95% of what the hell any objectivist has ever told me, and not just the ones on Twitter, but in my life.
I hope that Twitter, the 3 or 4 people that were in that thread representing objectivism don't actually represent objectivism, and I hope some people who are objectivist will reach out to us in some way, shape, or form, and maybe make some corrections and maybe make some things a little bit more clear and understandable, and maybe be like, yeah, that's not what it is, and maybe let those people know, because they don't seem to be aware if this is the case.
Yeah, and here's the problem, though. I don't have the ability to differentiate between what an actual objectivist would think and what they think. It's just
different. That's the thing. This is our sample size. This is all we have to go on.
Yeah, but I mean, I could read about. For example, if I want to read about moral relativism, I could read a book on moral relativism and get the concepts of it. Everything I've ever read of objectivism, okay, I understand the basic concepts, but they don't tell you anything. So she's, arguing for, nobody's altruistic. Okay, well, I think that's kind of a given in philosophy. That I don't think there's pure altruism either. But she's arguing about being selfish. This is this. I'm like, yeah, but what's the philosophy here? Again, if you want to argue the correspondence theory of truth, that there's some truth maker that exists and makes a proposition true, okay, I understand that about philosophy. But if you just argue, hey, if it doesn't exist in reality, then it's an error in your thinking, that's not an argument to me. That's not a philosophy.
These people being wrong and not understanding is your responsibility, Steve. This is all your fault. Steve's fault. Blame Steve. Fuck you.
I'm sure I'm going to get shit for it, but it's just like, I swear to you, I'm not trying to be disparaging, but I don't understand what the hell they argue, objectivist. Yeah, I'm talking about Ayn Rand type, yeah.
Let's get the hell out of here. If you're interested, I did a stream where I Beat Sabered my way into perfection. That's right. I got Expert Plus perfect on 2 songs, and it's only a 20-minute stream if you're interested. I also played Pokemon Insurgence yesterday. 2 videos coming out that are like, I just cut up the songs of getting them right, so you can see those if you'd rather watch it short. And tomorrow we have Caffeine Corner, and I think Red's Rhetoric is actually going to be on Fight the Flat Earth channel tonight. That's going to be a shit show.
And
So if you're interested in the shit show,
not to give away too much, but and I'm not going to say who because we're not going to do it till that day. But she's starting to get some guests lined up as well.
I am. That'll be next week, supposedly.
Yeah.
I have to touch base with them. I haven't talked to them in a little bit, just because it's been holidays and things have been going on. So I was like, I'll let them do their thing. So and I'll hit them back.
We're gonna be kind of busy this, and it's kind of good. It's kind of good that we're muddling through. This has been a difficult year, beyond exceptional losses, and I think though we're gonna make it. I think we're gonna be doing okay. We are never going to be the biggest. We're never going to be like exceptionally big YouTubers, but the fact that we have people watching at all, and the people that are donating, the people who support us, and the people,
Steve.
You might be. I've never ever argued that I'm going to be. Never said I was going to be a big YouTuber. Never. That was never been one of my goals. But my goal, I do have goals. My goals are that people learn something and people get something. They glean something from our streams. That's it. And they seems to do it. God's Otter, $72. Cheshire playing Beat Seizure. Yeah, I don't know the difference because I just see her doing gesticulations of all mannerisms of weird stuff. But...
I put camera stabilization on, so that should be a lot better now.
I kind of get the gist of the game. You have these things fly at you, and you've got to you gotta
hit them. You gotta hit the right direction.
Yeah,
with the right colors.
Yeah. All right.
It's very intuitive. It's not that difficult.
Yeah, no, I get the concept. I'm going to be playing Destiny.
If me and Steve ever meet up, I'll make him play it. I'll find a way.
I'll be in better shape. Speaking of which, as you guys may know, I am on a diet, have been for a month. I have lost actually a notable amount of weight, which I'm not going to get the technical.
You should save that for Caffeine Corner update because that was a Caffeine Corner show.
Well, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give the specifics, but I can tell you right now that I'm continuing it. I did go to Aldi's the other day, and I did get some stuff I probably shouldn't get, like some Camembert cheese and some really good chips that are probably higher in calorie than I like. But I am doing it moderately. But yeah, I want you guys to know that I haven't forgotten about my diet, and I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I feel good.
I've upped my 20 minutes to 45 on Beat Saber. Once I'm in quarantine right now because Ontario. So I haven't been able to take the dog. One of the reasons why Pug is whining right now is because he's bored, because he's also been stuck in quarantine because I'm not allowed to take him out for walks right now. So he goes out in the backyard and still plays around, but it's not the same. So once I'm out of quarantine, I'll then add my 20-minute walk to my 45 minutes of Beat Saber. So I've been slowly adding.
Yeah, I gotta start walking in.
You guys can join me because I'm doing that every morning/afternoon time.
So we'll see them tomorrow, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Peace out, people.
Bye.